Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Western Area Planning Committee, especially those members of the public who are watching the streaming online. I'm Councillor Clive Hooker and I'm acting as chairman this evening, having received apologies from our chairman, Councillor Phil Barnett. The members of the committee joining me this evening are Councillors Adrian Abbs, Nigel Foote, Denise Gaines, Howard Wollaston and Tony Vickers. The officers attending and presenting the application to the committee this evening are Deborah Inston, our team leader of Development Control, Jake Brown, Principal Planning Officer, Paul Goddard, Highways Development Control, Paul Backus, our Principal Engineer, who will be addressing SUDS issues this evening, and Tia Noley, who will be my legal advisor this evening. And Jessica Bayliss will be the clerk. I'm also assisted by Thomas Radbourne, who will be the Zoom host. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to explain for the benefit of those watching that it is being held both via Zoom and with councillors present here in the council chamber. The meeting is also being streamed live on YouTube, so the public are able to follow our proceedings this evening. Before we start, please can I ask that everyone present in the chamber to make sure that they switch on their microphones when invited to speak directly into them, and to switch them off when they're finished. Can I also ask that everyone in the chamber this evening turns their mobile phones to silent and turn off the sound on your laptops, please, members. Regarding our safety this evening, if we hear the fire alarm, we must leave the building immediately. Please leave via the safe emergency exit, which will be shown to us by the train officers present. Please follow any instruction given by the officers. The assembly point is in the Dolphin car park opposite. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await instructions from the officers. I will then adjourn the meeting until such time as it is safe to proceed. To be consistent with our council meetings, I'd like to remind members that we are subject to the council's code of conduct, which requires us to uphold certain standards, those being respectful to each other and to the officers and members of the public present. Members may not always agree with one another or with the officers' recommendations, but I would ask that in any disagreement, we are respectful of others' views and their positions. So therefore, we now move on to the agenda this evening, and we have item 1. Mrs. Bayliss, do we have any apologies, please?
Yes, Chairman. So I've received apologies from councillors Phil Barnett, Anthony Amitharaj and Paul Dick.
Thank you, Mrs. Bayliss. Item 2 of the agenda is to approve the minutes of our previous meetings. Members, our agenda shows we have 2 sets of meetings to approve this evening. The first was for the 24th of July and the second for the 21st of August. However, we've only just received 1 set of minutes for our consideration, those being the 24th of July. I am mindful that due to receiving these late yesterday afternoon, members may consider they have not had enough time to read them and make a comment. If that is the case, I'm happy to defer them until the next meeting in October, along with the minutes of the 21st of August, which we have not yet received. Can I have your views on that, please, members? I am happy to proceed if you've read the minutes and you find them okay. Councillor Wollaston. Councillor Wollaston.
First, defer if we may, Chairman.
Thank you.
I agree. I haven't had time to read.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Therefore, those minutes will be deferred along with the minutes for the 21st of August. Thank you. We now move on to item 3 of the agenda. Members, any declarations of interest? I will go first. I think I speak for most of us that I've been lobbied on our second application this evening, Elm Farm. Anybody else? 1, 2, 3. No. No. So 3 Elm Farm lobbied.
Yeah, on both the first and the second.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? Councillor Foote.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to bring to your attention that I sit on Newbury Town Council Planning and Highways Committee, and we did hear the first application at Newbury Town Council. Also, item 3 on the agenda, the Northcroft Leisure Centre, I should point out that I'm the current portfolio holder for culture, leisure, sport and countryside. Therefore, I am familiar with aspects of the Northcroft Leisure Centre and the refurbishment thereof. And I am in a live email conversation with members of the public about that, but that doesn't relate to this actual planning application this evening. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Are you happy with that? You're happy with that? Good.
Yeah, I should do
Councillor
the normal one. I'm Newbury Town Council. I actually am on planning and highways, but didn't attend the meetings where these two Newbury ones were discussed.
Councillor Abs.
Chairman, just declare I was lobbied on the item 1 on the agenda this evening. Item one on the agenda. Been lobbied.
Those are duly noted. Councillor Gaines.
Same, Chairman. I've been lobbied on 1 and 2.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
I've also been lobbied on 1, and I'm the shadow portfolio holder for leisure, so I suppose I have some sort of interest in item 3.
I feel somewhat let off there with let down. They're not involved in so many applications this evening. Okay, that's duly noted. We'll move on to item 4 on the agenda, which are our planning applications. Members, we have 3 applications to consider this morning. The first one is application 23/02782 Madge. This is at Pound Street. The second application is 23/02550 Madge, Elm Farm at Hampstead Marshall. And the third application is 24/01602 Reg 4. This is the Northbrook Leisure Centre at Newbury. And I will be taking these applications in the order as set out in the agenda tonight. Thank you. Just as an introduction, for those members of the public attending in person or watching online and are unfamiliar with the meeting format, I will now briefly outline the process for each application. The officers will present the application to the committee. The drawings, site plans and any deemed relevant material submitted on the planning file will be shown as a part of their presentation on the screens in the chamber and on your tablets and laptops at home. I will then invite the representatives from the following groups to come up to the lectern in front, or I will ask Mr. Radbourne to invite them into the meeting on Zoom to present their case to the committee. Each group will have a total of 5 minutes to speak. The order of the presentations will be, first up will be the parish council or the town council, next any objectors, then any supporters, and then the applicant or agent. On conclusion of each of those submissions, I will ask the members of the committee if they have any questions of clarification on that submission. Members will not be permitted to introduce new material into their questions. I will then invite the ward member to speak. They will also have 5 minutes to present their case. Committee members may then, on conclusion of that presentation, ask questions of clarification. The committee members will then have the opportunity to ask questions of the officer's presentation, which was given in the first instance. The committee will then debate the application and vote on the decision. Members of the public, any questions? Are you quite happy for us to proceed? Good, thank you. Then we'll move on to our first application this evening, which is application 22/02782/4 Madge. This is at 20 to 28A Pound Street. And this is for the demolition of the existing buildings and the existing dwellings at 26, 28 and 28A Pound Street, and erect 79 residential dwellings, access works, landscaping, open space, drainage and other associated works. Members of the public, this has come to committee due to more than 10 letters of objection. I'm going to ask this evening Mr. Brown, Mr. Goddard and Mr. Backus to make presentations in this application, and I'd ask Mr. Brown to do the first presentation. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Chairman.
the Grade 2 listed Newbury Hall to the west of the site on Rockingham Road here, and the Grade 2 listed Rockingham Road Bridge here. This is a view of the site from the Rockingham Road listed bridge, looking southeast. You can see the existing builders merchants building in the background. And here is a view of the site from Rockingham Road looking northeast with the Newbury Bathrooms showroom, which is to be demolished as part of the development, as well as the side elevation of the existing dwelling. This is a view of the junction with Rockingham Road from Pound Street looking northwest. We have the Grade 2 listed Newbury Hall and its turret and the existing dwelling on Pound Street. And here is a larger view of along Pound Street looking northwest with the front of the site looking down towards Bartholomew Street in the background. This is a closer view of the old Builders Merchants site. And here we have a view looking northwest along Pound Street with the neighbouring property at number 14 Pound Street and the barber shop on the ground floor. This plan shows the existing site overlaid with the proposed layout in black. Members will note the development of apartment block 1 in the southwest corner would project forward of the existing dwelling that is to be removed. But as proposed, block 1 turns the corner onto Rockingham Road, it will be set back from the southwest corner of the existing dwelling. In addition, proposed block 1 would be set back significantly from the existing built form of the Newbury bathroom showroom here, providing a greater separation between the Grade 2 listed Newbury Hall and the development proposed opposite. This plan shows the layout of the site with an apartment block 1 to the west set back from Rockingham Road with a curved frontage as the development turns the corner to Pound Street. Block 1 would be 3 stories in height with the eaves lowered below the window heads, creating a 2.5-story impression from the street frontage. To the east of block 1, 5 terraced houses, 2.5 stories in height with mansard roofs are proposed, set back slightly from the frontage of the adjacent apartment blocks. Either side of the terrace block would be a pedestrian and access routes into the site as shown here. A proposed new vehicle and pedestrian access from Pound Street into the site would be flanked by apartment blocks 3 and 4. These blocks would be 3.5 stories in height, lowering to 3 stories adjacent to the terrace dwellings here and here. To the east of block 4, a second row of terrace dwellings is proposed at the eastern end of the site, which will be set back from the front elevation of the neighbouring property at number 14 Pound Street by approximately 2 metres. Car parking for the development is to be provided to the rear of the site, with vehicle routes and some of the parking provided under the apartment blocks at ground floor level. Landscaping is proposed along the northern rear boundary of the site and along the pedestrian and access routes into the apartment blocks and garden areas as shown here. Shallow front gardens with limited landscaping are proposed fronting Pound Street, which increase in depth as the development approaches the corner with Rockingham Road, where a small area for public seating is proposed here. Please note the plan shown here indicates green roofs, which are not proposed as part of this development. Rather, much of the flat roof areas of the apartment blocks and the front elevations, southern roof slopes of the terrace dwellings are proposed to be covered with solar panels. This plan of apartment block 1 shows the elevation fronting Rockingham Road and has half dormers with projecting gables, which then turns the corner to front Pound Street here. The rear north elevation would be visible from the Rockingham Road Grade 2 listed bridge, Whilst no openings are proposed on this elevation, to ensure acceptable internal noise levels for future occupants from the railway, articulation in the form of blind windows with lighter infill brick to add visual interest to this elevation is proposed as shown here. A full view of the street scene proposed is shown at the top here with close-up views of the western and eastern halves of the site below. Note the eave and ridge height of Block 1 relative to Newbury Hall. The terrace dwellings with slight variations in material, colour and gaps between the built form. The projecting gables and setback of 3-storey side elements of Block 3 and 4. And the scale of the eastern terrace of dwellings proposed relative to the existing neighbouring property at 14 Pound Street. This provides a perspective view of the proposed development from Pound Street looking westward towards Newbury Hall in the background, with apartment block 1 and the western length of the terrace dwellings here. And here we have a perspective view of the proposed development from Pound Street outside of Newbury Hall, looking eastwards. And here is a closer view with apartment 1, block 1 in the foreground. For the reasons set out in the report, the principle of the redevelopment of this site for housing, the majority of which would be on previously developed land, is acceptable. Whilst the proposed housing mix is not in strict accordance with the suggested mix in the Council's strategic housing market assessment or housing background paper, it would incorporate both flats and townhouses, both of which are common in the surrounding area and town centre of Newbury. And the site is in an accessible location, close to a variety of services and amenities and transport links. The proposed development would also make efficient use of brownfield land and achieve a density appropriate for its town centre location. During the consideration of the application, amendments have been made and the number of dwellings proposed reduced as a result to address concerns raised by the officers, including the Conservation and Design Officer regarding the design, appearance and impact on the character of the area, the conservation area and its setting, and the setting of the nearby Grade 2 listed buildings and bridge. The site currently makes a negative contribution to the character and appearance of the area. The proposed development would introduce a strong active frontage to Pound Street, with an urban grain of development that is considered to respect existing finely grained development in the area. The proposed layout is considered to be permeable and legible and provide adequate access and natural surveillance. The amended proposed appearance, scale and massing is considered to be acceptable, and whilst the amended scheme is still of a larger scale than the surrounding Edwardian and Victorian development, the changes to the form and massing have helped to mitigate against this. Whilst more significant landscaping would be preferred, it is considered, on balance, that the proposed landscaping would be reflective of the character of the area and street scene and would not warrant a reason for refusal. In respect of heritage assets, the development is considered to introduce a low level of less than substantial harm to the significance of the Newbury Town Centre conservation area, proximate listed buildings along Pound Street and Newbury Hall, due to the solar panels and scale of blocks 1, 3 and 4 being out of keeping in terms of footprint and height with the surrounding development and limiting wider views towards the Newbury Hall turret. In respect of the amenity of neighbouring properties and future occupiers, for the reasons set out in the report, the proposed development is not considered to introduce any significant detrimental impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties. Whilst the on-site amenity provision proposed falls below that set out in the Council's Quality Design SPD, it would not be out of character with the area and future occupants would have access to a good amount of high-quality public open space nearby. The proposed development would, subject to the completion of a satisfactory planning obligation, provide 24 affordable dwellings in accordance with planning policy. A total of 96 car parking spaces are required by council planning policy, and 98 car parking spaces are proposed, which is considered acceptable to highways officers. Highways officers are also content with the proposed cycle storage, but further details would need to be submitted on the type of storage to be used, together with details of electric vehicle charging points. Those details can be secured by condition. The footway fronting the site will need to be surfaced with improved street lighting, if required, prior to the site being brought into use. A pedestrian crossing within Pound Street to the east of the proposed vehicle access, consisting of dropped curves and tactile paving, is also required and can be secured by condition. The biodiversity net gain assessment submitted concludes that the development proposed would provide a substantial net gain in biodiversity habitats of 303.9% and hedgerow of 551.4%. The council's ecologist has confirmed that the ecological information submitted is sufficient and acceptable, and the development proposed accords with policy CS17, subject to the conditions set out in the agenda report and update sheet. As set out in the update report, clarification was sought at the committee site visit regarding the provision of biodiversity enhancements proposed. The application is accompanied by an ecological impact assessment, which proposes landscaping and enhanced roosting opportunities for bats through the provision of 6 bat bricks, as well as new nest boxes for birds. To ensure the provision of adequate bat bricks and bird boxes, an additional condition is proposed in the update report should members resolve to approve the application. The lead local flood authority have reviewed the latest amended flood risk assessment and drainage strategy and are broadly satisfied that previous issues raised by them have been addressed. They do, however, have some remaining concerns regarding the details submitted, but confirm that such details can be adequately addressed by condition. Policy CS15 of the core strategy requires major developments to achieve zero carbon in total CO2 emissions from renewable or low zero carbon energy generation on site, unless it can be demonstrated that such provision is not technically or economically viable. The Environment Delivery Team has been consulted on the latest energy statement addendum submitted, and confirm that whilst the development proposed would not achieve zero carbon, it has been sufficiently demonstrated that it would not be technically viable to achieve zero carbon due to the limited available space within the site. For the reasons set out in the agenda report, the proposal is considered to be in accordance with the development plan as a whole, and subject to conditions and a planning obligation, represents sustainable development for the purposes of the National Planning Policy Framework. Furthermore, the redevelopment of this brownfield site to provide 79 homes, including 24 affordable homes, is an important social benefit, attracting substantial weight. The proposal would provide economic benefits such as temporary employment opportunities and secondary employment through future resident spending in the local area, and would also increase expenditure in the local area. These economic benefits attract considerable weight. In this instance, as the harm to heritage assets identified would be confined to a small section of the conservation area and setting of the respective listed buildings, the harm to these heritage assets would be at a low level of less than substantial harm, but nevertheless of great weight. Under such circumstances, the National Planning Policy Framework advises that this harm should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal. In this regard, even in circumstances where a low level of less than substantial harm exists, this should not be equated with a lesser planning objection and is still of considerable importance and weight. The benefits of the scheme range from limited to substantial in magnitude, and are regarded as public benefits that are considered to outweigh the low level of less than substantial harm to the significance of the heritage assets in accordance with the NPPF. Therefore, having special regard to the desirability of preserving heritage assets and their setting in accordance with Section 66 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act, the development would have an acceptable effect in terms of heritage assets. To mitigate the impact of the development on local services and facilities, a planning obligation is required to secure affordable housing provision, a financial contribution for the provision of appropriate primary healthcare facilities in the local area of Newbury to serve the proposed development, and a financial contribution toward the provision of public open space or improved facilities nearby. As such, members are recommended to grant approval subject to the satisfactory completion of the planning obligation and conditions proposed as set out in section 8 of the agenda report and on the update report. Should the planning obligation not be completed by the 18th of November 2024, or such longer period that may be authorised by the development manager in consultation with the chairman or vice chairman of this planning committee, officers recommend that the application is refused for the reasons set out in section 8 of the agenda report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, and we'll have opportunity to ask questions later on. I now move on to Mr. Goddard, who will present the highways issues on this application. Mr. Goddard, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The highways section of the report is from page 31 of your main committee report there. Members will be aware that for many years the site has been a builder's merchants and would have generated a level of traffic associated with that. Your highway officers take the view with this proposal before you, there is unlikely to be much change in the overall level of traffic generation with the proposal compared to the existing, and therefore no objection from highway officers is raised on traffic generation grounds. The development is of a sufficient size that it warrants a travel plan. The purpose of a travel plan is to have measures to encourage residents to walk, cycle, and use public transport whenever possible. And this would have some impact on reducing the traffic figures which are included there in the report to an extent. The development will be served by a single access off of Pound Street, which we as officers are content with regards to width and regards to sightlines. Refuse will be collected from Pound Street, which after some thought highway officers consider is acceptable on balance, as this is quite a normal situation along this street with all the rest of the existing dwellings there. The car parking standards set out in the council's housing site allocations DPD policy P1 have been complied with. Initially, the scheme came in with a shortfall, but with reductions the number of flats, I can advise the committee that the car parking standards are complied with. The car parking within the site is communal, so it's shared amongst all the flats and all the dwellings within the site. We are content with that, and we think that is quite normal. Further details are required on the type of cycle storage and the numbers and locations of electric vehicle charging points, which we like to see these days, but these can be covered by condition to allow us further details to be submitted. By the time construction is finished, the footway fronting the site will certainly need to be resurfaced, and opportunities should be taken where required to improve lighting fronting the site. In addition to the footway being resurfaced, there will be a crossing to assist pedestrians crossing Pound Street that will consist of some dropped curbs and tactile paving just to the east of the proposed access and the existing access to the cooperative store opposite. And with all that, on that basis, your highway officers raise no objection to this planning application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Thank you. I asked Mr. Backus to come along this evening because of the position of the site, and subsequently, since the meeting, there was an issue of drainage of which wasn't covered at the site meeting. So I'll ask Mr. Backus to give us a presentation on the said situation. Thank you, Mr. Backus.
Thank you. For the members' benefit and everyone else, flood risk matters are addressed on page 33 in the agenda pack. We, the lead local flood authority, have not found sufficient reason to object to this application, subject to the implementation of recommended conditions. That's contained in part 9 of the conditions in the agenda pack. 20 to 28 Pound Street, Newbury is a brownfield site predominantly comprised of buildings and hard-standing surfaces. The site is not known to be subject to surface water flooding, fluvial flooding, groundwater flooding, or sewer flooding as correctly identified in the flood risk assessment. Outside of the site, the railway line and the junction between Pound Street and Bartholomew Street are believed to be vulnerable to the impacts of surface water flooding. There is therefore a requirement to ensure that the proposal does not increase flood risk to the surrounding area, and exceedance resulting from flooding is managed carefully. This matter is covered by recommended drainage condition 9C. There are private surface water and foul sewers within the extent of the site. The drainage strategy does not identify the layout of the existing private sewage system. However, the proposal will require replacement of those sewers, and calculations do demonstrate consideration of runoff from the existing site. There are no public surface water or foul sewers within the site extent, but there are public sewers adjacent to it. There are both foul and surface water public sewers running along Pound Street. As part of the proposed drainage strategy, the applicant has demonstrated that they have followed the discharge hierarchy for surface water drainage. The applicant has ruled out infiltration due to the underlying geology of the site. They provided adequate justification for ruling out this means of discharge. There are no watercourses near to the site, and therefore the public sewers are the only viable discharge location for getting rid of runoff within this site. When discharging into public sewer systems, the applicant must demonstrate that they have restricted discharge rates to greenfield runoff rates or as low as is viable. For brownfield sites, some leniency is typically shown for this requirement. The applicant has proposed to restrict discharge rates of surface water runoff to 2 litres a second up to the 1 in 100 year plus climate change event. This is commonly accepted as the minimum permissible discharge rate from sites due to smaller flow controls being at risk of blockage. In other words, this is the highest standard. It is some 25 to 150 times less than the existing runoff from the site. So the discharge rate of 2 litres a second is deemed acceptable. We typically require applicants to demonstrate that they have contacted Thames Water with a pre-development inquiry, confirming that they have capacity within the receiving foul and surface water sewers to accommodate the development. The applicant has provided evidence in Appendix G of the flood risk assessment that they have correspondence with Thames Water. However, they have not attached the corresponding PDF, which typically constitutes the pre-application evidence. Nonetheless, the correspondence does confirm that there is capacity for the proposed discharge of foul water. It does place a burden on West Berks to approve the surface water discharge first, though, as mentioned previously, we are happy with that. Although the applicant has not provided the PDF, which contains the detailed response from Thames Water, despite a further request for information, it is a matter which can and has been conditioned under 9I. In order to facilitate the restricted flow rate, it's necessary to provide attenuation storage on site. In this instance, the applicant has opted to use 2 large geocellular attenuation tanks accommodating a combined volume of approximately 285 metres cubed water. We would prefer designers make creative use of space to provide attenuation storage. However, we do accept a compromise as required when heavily restricting discharge rates on brownfield sites, which are often subject to significant constraints. We did request better SUDS usage on site, and the applicant has provided revised drainage details, which you can see on the screen, showing rain gardens. And that combined with the permeable paving, the geocellular storage tanks, the filter drain, and permeable paving, if I didn't already mention that, the applicant has provided SUDS solutions which offer biodiversity, amenity, water quality, and water storage benefits, which is therefore acceptable. A maintenance schedule has been provided, and the drainage strategy specifies that a management company will be appointed to maintain SUDS throughout the lifetime of the development. Whilst the drainage strategy has been developed to an outline level, there is sufficient information to condition remaining matters to be addressed during detailed design. We therefore, as mentioned previously, don't have any objections to this application subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Bacchus. Members, we now move on to the presentations from our attendees. And as I mentioned, the first up will be the Town Council. And I think this evening we've got Councillor David Harmon. Councillor Harmon, good evening. Thank you for coming along. I guess you've been along to these meetings before. You've got 5 minutes. If you're going to take the whole 5 minutes, around about 4 minutes, I'll give you a 1 minute notice. And then I'll give you 10 seconds, which will say in conclusion. So you know you're getting to the end of your 5 minutes. Okay. No, we're live, so we need to put it onto the Zoom.
Oh, there you go. There we go. Excellent. We're there. Thank you for the invitation. So we just wanted to reiterate what we have forward in terms of our comments from Newbury Town Council. So on our 9th of September Planning and Highways meeting, the outcome of that was a no objection to this planning application. We did want to put on record that the proponents coming back after their first one, they did listen to our concerns, and I think the districts as well. So we just wanted to commend them on their engagement with us and making the changes that make us more comfortable with it. Principally, they did step back from that Rockingham Road junction, so pulled away a little bit from Newbury Hall. That made us a lot more comfortable with it. So that engagement was most welcome. Our consideration is that it's a great reuse and regeneration of a former brownfield site that would otherwise just be sat there. So that's great. It provides the much needed affordable housing in the region as well. So, that's excellent. The only thing we did have to comment on it was just noting that the public had a lot of concerns around parking and highways, and it sounds like that's been getting a lot of consideration at districts. So we'll just leave that really for members for your consideration when you're looking at this application. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harmon. Members, have you any questions of clarification of his presentation? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
We have no objectors this evening. We have no supporters, but we do have the applicant. We have Mr. Jamie Pearson from Archell Homes and Catherine Bruce from Savills. If you both like to come up to the lectern.
Good evening. Thank you. Good evening, members, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee this evening. Thank you also to your officers for a thorough report and presentation supporting their recommendation to approve this application, and also your time at the site meeting we had with the members that could attend. Thank you very much. My name is Jamie Pearson. I'm from Archwell Homes. I own the site. I'm a local developer and I've worked very hard with the consultant team to develop the proposed scheme before you. Originally submitted in December 23, we've worked closely with your officers, including planning, design, conservation and highways, to develop the proposals which seek to regenerate this unattractive and redundant brownfield town centre sustainable site. Technical consultees have confirmed no objection to the proposed development, subject to the inclusion of suitable conditions. We have engaged with local stakeholders and the local community, leading to no objection from Newbury Town Council and the Newbury Society. We've listened, making a number of key amendments to the scheme during the determination period, including a reduction in the height of the proposed buildings to improve the relationship with Newbury Hall and the provision of a policy compliant level of parking on the site. Our proposals strike an appropriate balance between regenerating this vacant site and delivering a policy compliant on-site level of attractive, new, affordable and market homes. Ensuring appropriately designed new homes that are sympathetic to the conservation area, including Newbury Hall, has been a key driver in the development of these proposals. We welcome the support of your urban design and conservation officer for our proposals. The application scheme represents sustainable development in accordance with the NPPF and as set out in your officer's report is in accordance with your adopted development plan. The proposed development offers a number of significant social, economic and environmental benefits that weigh strongly in support of this application. The delivery of 79 new homes, including 24 affordable, should be afforded significant weight. We are working already closely with a housing association on the project, and they are keen to deliver this element of the scheme. A mix of townhouses and apartments will be provided, catering for individuals, downsizers, and importantly, families. Future residents will be provided with high quality living accommodation, cycle and car parking. The proposed development is highly sustainable, incorporating sustainable drainage systems, electric vehicle charging points, air source heat pumps, and photovoltaic panels. The proposals will introduce extensive new landscaping, planting to this derelict brownfield site, resulting in an over 300% biodiversity net gain. The site, being located within the town centre, ensures that future residents will have easy access to local facilities, services and public transport. And in addition, financial contributions towards healthcare and open space will be secured and SIL payments made towards other infrastructure requirements such as education. This application provides an exciting opportunity to deliver much needed new homes and rejuvenate this vacant and derelict site within this important part of Newbury Town Centre. We commend this proposal and respectfully request members support the officer's recommendation to approve this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. If you'd just like to wait 1 minute, Councillor Vickers has a question he'd like to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. I'd like to agree with the town council that you've obviously done a lot to meet residents and the council's objections. My question is about your on-site parking arrangements. Policy compliant, yes, and I presume you're aware that your residents won't be allowed to take advantage of residents' permits on the highways. But how are you proposing to allocate the spaces to individual apartments? Because that can be a concern and lead to some residents finding that they have to park elsewhere.
I think we've got a car park management plan, which will be part of the conditions which we've agreed with the highways officer. As it stands at the moment, it's going to be a communal car park, but managed by that, with the management company involved as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gaines, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for coming, Mr. Pearson.
My pleasure.
The affordable homes, you mentioned that, so I can actually mention it. Obviously there's some apartments and some terraced houses. What element of the build is actually affordable? Are they just apartments? Are there some terraced houses?
No, sorry. There's a very healthy mix actually of the homes that are going to be split between the private accommodation and the affordable. Your officer has got a sort of indicative plan as to how the accommodation is at the moment going to be split. But there's some of the 3-storey townhouses are for social rent. We've got 1s and 2s as well that are split between private and social rent as well as some intermediate. So I think pepper potting is probably the right phrase for it, rather than it necessarily being at just one end of the site, which you might have seen before.
Excellent, thank you.
Any more questions, councillor Abs?
And my question got answered.
It's got,
as it went.
You're happy, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pearson, for your presentation this evening. Members, we now move on to the ward member. I've got down councillor Sturgis, as you hear this, she is. And just for note, councillor Colston has sent his apologies and can't be here this evening. So councillor Sturgis, you're on your own.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. So, as the Chair said, Councillor Martin Colston is unable to attend the meeting this evening, so I'm speaking on behalf of both of us as ward members for Newbury Central. So, as members of the committee will see from their papers, I called in the application. Given its size and its scale and its location, I wanted to ensure it had the maximum level of scrutiny possible within the planning process. So this evening, I'm here to represent the views of those residents, many living very close to the site, who have objected to the proposal, and I would like to draw members' attention to those objections. These have ranged from concerns regarding the size and height of the scheme and its impact on the streetscape, to access arrangements and an increase in traffic levels. And I would just ask the committee to carefully consider residents' objections fully before making its final decision. Should the committee be minded to approve the application this evening, residents have collated and asked for amendments to be made to the following conditions, which I shall read out. Condition number 11, water network. Replace no dwelling shall be first occupied to no development shall commence, as there remains significant concern among the community regarding the drainage infrastructure. Condition 12 around building materials. The request from residents is to be more prescriptive with regards to building materials, and that the condition be worded to specify natural handmade materials, i.e. clay or natural slate roof tiles. Condition 14, details of eaves and fascias. That the condition include windows and doors and is a typical condition. Residents feel that one subtle detail that will significantly enhance the elevations is that the windows and doors are set back by at least 100 millimetres from the front face of the brickwork. Condition 15, decorative feature details. The request is that the condition be changed from brickwork and stonework to handmade brickwork and natural stonework. Condition 19, public seating in communal areas. External street lighting should be included within this for secure by design and enhanced visual surveillance. And condition 28, refuse storage and domestic paraphernalia. A management plan should be prescribed to ensure residents of the dwellings store their refuse bins in the reared gardens. And this is to avoid detrimental visual clutter, given that the location is in proximity to the conservation area. So thank you, and I'd like to ask members to give these points and residents' objections thorough consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Any questions, members? We do, councillor.
Could you just repeat the first one that you raised?
Yes. That was condition 11 with regards to the water network. Replace no dwelling shall be first occupied to no development shall commence. And this is due to concerns among the community regarding the drainage infrastructure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you, councillor Sturgis, for your presentation. Members, we now move on questions of our officers. If you'd like to raise your hands and say who you'd like to address the questions to. Councillor Abs.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not exactly sure who would answer this. It may be Deborah here, but we'll ask the question and we'll see which one raises their hand. When I was reading the letters of objection on the website for this application, there's one that wasn't, or one that came up that wasn't mentioned a lot, which was green infrastructure. Because obviously it's a brownfield site, and we're changing that, which basically has none, to being occupied, and those people that would occupy the property will need green infrastructure, need to go to the park or whatever, especially if the family's there. So bear with me with this. CS 18 states that right at the bottom, a green infrastructure SPD will be provided by the council, but I couldn't actually find one. And that was back in 2012. Natural England has published in February, 2nd of February 2023 is when it arrived on the government's website, a new green infrastructure framework. And so the question to the officers is, given all of that, things that we're supposed to have that I can't find, but that would have been relevant here, given that we are going to have all of these people, how have we taken into account the green infrastructure side of this as a sustainable? Yes, it is in the town centre, I get that, but it is just throwing more people into the existing parks. And so how many square meters are we going to have of park left if we keep dumping people in without providing anything on site? Whereas I can't see anything on site. So
Who would like to take this? Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just direct members to paragraph 6.71 onwards of the agenda report, where we talk about green infrastructure and the amenity provision for future occupiers of the site. Moving down towards 6.75, I identify a number of public open spaces that are available in close proximity to the site for future residents. The amount of public open space that would normally be required in paragraphs 6.80 of between 0.56 and 0.82 hectares of public open space. We then acknowledge that the site is extremely constrained, and to ensure efficient use of the brownfield site and delivery of much needed housing, we have considered, as allowed by policy RL2 of the West Berkshire District Local Plan Safe policies in terms of open space, public open space, this is appropriate to be mitigated by a contribution to meet the public open space requirements of this development. And a public open space contribution is to be secured for this development via planning obligation, albeit we are still waiting for confirmation from the council's countryside and public open space team as to the exact amount that will be. However, that contribution is to be used to provide either improved facilities at existing public open spaces in the close proximity to the site, or additional new public open space should the council choose. So in terms of that element of green infrastructure, officers consider that the proposed development as a whole, with the planning obligation, providing that financial contribution, does provide sufficient green infrastructure. I will also just point out that there is some landscaping on the site, the green infrastructure in terms of the continuous landscaped boundary along the northern part of the site on the edge of the railway. That is also considered to be green infrastructure within the site. And also the small area of public open space that is provided on site right on the corner of Rockingham Road and Pound Street, albeit it is just a small seated public open space area, but that does provide some additional green infrastructure. That answers the question.
Yes, it does, and I can see the SPD mentioning things and the points that you're making. But so you seem to have made the choice that it's a bit of money, a contribution to potentially do something in an area that's a town centre where we can't buy anything to create green space.
Okay.
I think I'll bring it up in debate.
Bring it up in debate and see how the members grasp that. Councillor Vickers, I thought you.
Yeah, I picked up in the officer's presentation, the housing mix is not quite in accord with our policy. Could you elaborate on that? Because it sounded as though they've, got the pepper potting and the good mix.
Yes, so in paragraph 6.10 of the report, I set out the identified housing mix requirements of the strategic housing market assessment, that the council was produced. And those are set out in percentages going through to 6.11 of the report. Then there is the housing background paper, which is a more up-to-date assessment of housing mix. And in 6.14, there is a table there showing the suggested mixes from the housing background paper in comparison to the proposed. As I point out in paragraph 6.15, the proposed mix, when compared to this more recent evidence, would provide a mix comprising significantly more one-bed and affordable home ownership dwellings and significantly fewer three-bed market and affordable home ownership dwellings and rented dwellings than is suggested by that evidence. In addition, despite an identified need for a mix to include 4+ bed dwellings in the latest evidence, the development proposed would not provide any. In general, the proposed development would provide a mix significantly weighted towards 1 and 2 bed dwellings. Now, it's accepted, and it's been accepted in appeal decisions by inspectors, that housing mix is not simply dictated by a housing market assessment. It is also relevant to take into account the character of the area and how accessible the site is to close to variety of amenities and transport links. Given that this is a town centre site, generally housing mixes are of 1 or 2 bed dwellings are more acceptable, and it's anticipated that larger family home dwellings of 3 and 4 beds would be provided by other developments such as Sandalford, where there is an emphasis on family housing, such that across the district as a whole, and the strategic housing market assessment is assessing the district as a whole, those rural areas and urban areas together. When all those developments are taken into account, we aim to achieve the percentages set out in the market assessments.
Thank you. That's a helpful explanation.
Thank you. Any more questions, members? I've got a question. Thank you to Mr. Goddard. Thank you, Mr. Goddard, for including a zebra crossing, presumably, on this application. It's not a zebra crossing. It was brought up at the site meeting. Could you just expand on that? Also, while you're on your feet, if you could just expand on disabled parking. I don't think that was mentioned as what percentage or numbers on the parking spots. And the third question to you, Mr. Goddard, if I may, waste collection on Pound Street. I've got this vision of 79 bins lined up all down Pound Street. Are you considering commercial bins and just put 4 large bins out, which we picked up, presumably not by Viola, but by a commercial waste collector? Just a little bit of explanation on that. Obviously, green bins as such will be minimal because of the housing situation and limited gardens, but still food waste is another issue of 70 bins being out. Just expand there, if you would, on that delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The proposed crossing to the east of the access and the cooperative store is only a set of drop curbs and tactile paving, the sort of blister type paving that you get at crossings for partially sighted people. It's not a signal crossing or a zebra crossing. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, the Department of Transport have a criteria on whether such crossings are required. There is a formulaic approach that they deploy. and it considers the number of vehicles and the number of pedestrians, and whether in the formula a certain value is reached, whether such a crossing would be provided. I would doubt that the criteria would be met in this case. A further reason for a crossing such as a zebra crossing is that on the approach to the crossing, there would need to be the zigzag lines. And those lines would result in the loss of a section of the on-street car parking there, which would require a traffic regulation order and a separate consultation with the community. My thoughts would be that the community might have something to say about the loss of on-street car parking in this area, considering the demand for it. So we think we've got a balance on the particular crossing that's required. It probably might take out one parking space in addition to get a crossing there to help people cross the site to facilities to the south, including the cooperative store. Parking for disabled persons, it should be up to 4%. And I'm looking at the drawings. There's two there, so they may be a bit short. So if members are concerned.
It's a help, Mr. Goddard. Councillor Abb says he's counted 4, but where they are, the other two I count.
Underneath, okay, then that would mean that threshold has been met. Thank you. I've just got a layout plan as it shows you the cut-off parking. So
we'll move on quickly if we may.
Thank you for that. Was there any other bins? Yes, there are bins in a number of different locations. They are the big bins for the flats, not 79 individual bins. So there are a few different points where the refuse vehicle would stop along there, and the large Euro bins would serve the blocks of flats. So it's not 79 bins, it's probably a much smaller number.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. One more question from Councillor Abbs, please.
Which is directly linked to bins, because I'm looking at the layout, or proposed layout. I have big bin, individual bins on the curbside. Rest of the street scene is like that, fair enough. But big bins I don't see anywhere else on the street scene, and I don't see any parking space for those big bins. So who's rolling? Where are they? How are they being rolled around? They can't surely be just left on the street.
No, we're about to put up a plan showing you where the bins.
Thank you very much indeed.
They are shown there in yellow.
Yellow. So they're inside the buildings?
Yes, they're inside the buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes all the questions from the members. So we now move on to the debate this evening, members. And all I'd like to say is, before we start, we do have 3 applications this evening, and I'd like very much to address all 3 of them. So please, can I ask that during the debate, you're short and precise as possible with your contribution, and avoid duplication on what may have been mentioned previously by a fellow committee member. Thank you. Now, just to focus the minds on this evening, the main issues for consideration in this applications are the principle of the development, the housing type and mix, design, character and appearance, impact and heritage assessments, impact on neighbour and amenity of future occupiers, affordable housing, highway matters, biodiversity, flooding and drainage, sustainable contribution, healthcare, and there is a planning obligation to the S106 at the end. So it's quite a wide range of issues we need to look at during our debate. Councillor Vickers is going to start us off. Thank you, Councillor Vickers.
Yes, thanks for that helpful list, Joan. I live pretty near there, within 400 metres, and I think my views are pretty well shared by everybody on the Westfields estate, which note is a 20 mph zone. And I think that addresses a particular highway issue, which is that we don't have anywhere on this estate which has over 1,200 homes. And Councillor Sturgis knows it as well as I do, because she lives in there as well. don't have any pedestrian crossings, basically because of the speed of the traffic. I think people just work out how to cross the road safely, and it seems to work. Now that junction is quite busy, but I would agree that what is provided is sufficient there. As for nearby public open space, we always forget about the canal side. That is one of the best places that people go to. And of course, rather than some of the places listed, Sunderland Gardens, Wormsall Recreation Ground, Fifth Road Recreation Ground, I really don't think anybody's going to go there unless their kids happen to go to school there and it's on the way there or back. I think the Victoria Park and Northcroft Park are going to be the areas that most need contributions to improve their facilities for the residents of this site. And finally, there are a lot of swifts. We mentioned this on site. One of the, and I can agree, they're zooming around my house. I've put up 2 nests, but nobody's taken residence yet. I'm not quite yet offended, but I do think that the nice design, the sort of vernacular design, hopefully we can fit in some swift boxes under the eaves on this, and that might be mentioned in the ecological condition there. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Councillor Abbs.
Thank you. I thought it was Callum was next, but yeah, I really come down to the amenity side of this. And funnily enough, Councillor Vickers has just mentioned how there's all these places locally. But I wouldn't disagree with that. However, CS 18 is very clear in that where possible, green space should be made available on site, and we aren't just under-delivering by a small percentage. It's less than half of what is required or is in the policy. So I'm struggling with a little bit because we can say, oh, well, we can't fit it in. Well, you can only fit, only reason you can't fit it in is because you're trying to build 79. I'm totally in favour of brownfield development. And yes, 79 is an interesting number, but actually 69 would have probably solved the problem. It would have also solved some of the other parking problems and so on and so forth. So I'm struggling to be 100% behind the development, which is why I'm not going to propose supporting this, but I want to listen to the rest of the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Councillor Wollaston.
I have to say, for me, this ticks all the boxes. It meets the affordable requirements. It creates housing, which we're desperately in need of. And it goes somewhere, a tiny way, I know, to what is now going to be required under the local plan. I don't want to curtail debate, but I have to say, I think I will be supporting this. I will be supporting this.
As a consideration, I was interested with Councillor Sturgis's presentation, and I'll ask Mrs. Inston how we address this. There was a list of conditions there that were mentioned for us to consider. Can you just address us how we, at this stage, address each one of those and see how, maybe you could mention and see how it's considered by the members, so it can be included in the conditions if need be, if we deem it appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if I can, we've had a copy from Councillor Sturgis prior to the committee meetings. We've had a chance to look through. And we have, if you members turn to the update report, we have amended a number of conditions and added new conditions in response to a lot of the points Councillor Sturgis raised. In terms of one of the comments was about details of windows and doors and window reveals. We've now taken that from the building materials condition, and that is a standalone separate condition now, requiring external joinery, windows and doors details, including reveals, so we can check that it's sufficiently set back to give interest to the elevations. We've also amended the buildings materials condition. We haven't, in relation to Councillor Sturgis' request to have to identify that the building materials are handmade, bricks and stone. We haven't. We don't recommend that. We don't feel as officers that would be reasonable in this instance. We would normally only require handmade building materials for listed buildings, if it's an extension to a listed building, or if it's a new building within a conservation area that's next to another, and it, you know, we're trying to tie it in very carefully with adjoining development. In this case, because the scheme will have some modern elements, we feel that the building materials condition, just seeking a schedule of materials and finishes visible external to the building, is sufficient, and as part of the process, when we get those details in, we will ensure that the materials are high quality. So regardless whether or not they're handmade or not, we feel that that's it's unnecessary to specify handmade. We would just need
Also, would it not be unfair on the developer for the increased cost?
Yes, it would. It would have a significant increase in cost in the development, and there are, and given the fact that it's not works to a listed building, we wouldn't consider it necessary in this case. I think a comment was made about public seating. Oh, sorry, and there was a comment made about the water network and a change to condition 11 about it being prior to commencement of development rather than prior to commencement of occupation. We've looked at condition 11, and I'm just going to turn to it now on page 45, the agenda. The condition 11 is stating no dwelling shall be first occupied until confirmation has been submitted to and approved in writing by the LPI that the water networks and upgrades required to accommodate the additional demand have been completed, and that the development infrastructure phasing plan has been agreed with Thames Water. Because the impact of these will only be, there will be no impact until the building's occupied. So it's only really, it would be unnecessary to have it as unreasonable to have as a pre-commencement condition. Preoccupation would be sufficient because there would be no there would be no strain on the Thames network prior to commencement. It would only be when the buildings are occupied, which is the important trigger for that one.
Members, I think Mrs. Inston has covered those issues. Are we happy that they have been correctly addressed by our officers, and we're happy to include those in the conditions later on as a part of the vote, whichever way we go?
Yes, Chairman. I'd like to move to support this proposal as stands, having listened to the rest of the debate.
Do I have a second? I do.
I second that, Chairman.
Councillor Wollaston, thank you.
Chairman, just a couple of minor points I've mentioned in what I said before, but can we amend the conditions specifically, particularly on the bird boxes? Bat boxes, sorry, swift boxes are a very particular kind of bird box. A bat would turn up its nose at anything that wasn't particularly designed for a very amazing landing and takeoff. And I can also say there are a lot of sparrows around there, but I think they're not that. No. And I'm not sure what they particularly need, but I've got an enormous number in my garden.
I'm happy to accept that amendment, Chairman, as
Members,
the proposer.
yeah, members, this is your last opportunity for conditions before we put it to the vote. Any more conditions that come up in the discussion?
Can I just double check that condition?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Just want to double check the bird box condition in the update report on page 3 of the update report, condition 34, biodiversity measures, which is an additional condition, states that the development hereby permitted should not be occupied until bat bricks and bird boxes. Is your suggestion, rather than bird boxes, the generic bird boxes, to have swifter boxes?
Bird boxes including
swift boxes, so we can add that to the condition. Okay, thank you, Councillor.
I'm pretty sure the developer won't mind doing that.
All done. Good. Right. So before I put it to the vote, Ms. Noley and Ms. Inston, we're all now quite clear on the conditions that have been raised during the debate. I do have a proposer, Councillor Abbs, and I have a second with Councillor Wollaston. I think I've got that the right way round. The recommendation is to delegate to the development manager to grant planning permission subject to the additional conditions identified during the debate and the conditions stated in the agenda, those being that provided a Section 106 agreement has been completed by the 18th of November 2024, or such longer period that may be authorised by the development manager in consultation with the chairman or vice chairman of the Western Area Planning Committee, to delegate to the development manager to grant planning permission subject to the conditions listed in Section 8 of this report that we've received, or minor and inconsequential amendments to those conditions authorised by the development manager in consultation again with the chairman or vice chairman of the Western Area Planning Committee. Or if Section 106 agreement is not completed to delegate to the development manager to refuse planning permission for the reason listed in Section 8 of the report. So the vote is for application number 23/02782 for Madge at 20 to 28A Pound Street for the demolition of existing buildings and the existing dwellings at 26, 28 and 28A Pound Street, and erect 79 residential dwellings alongside access works, landscaping, open space drainage and other associated works. I'll now ask Ms Noley if she'd be kind enough to carry out the vote. Ms Noley.
Can I have those in favours, please? That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. Then that application is granted. Congratulations, and we look forward to seeing that development, and maybe we'll get an invite to go around and have a look at it when it's finished. Best of luck. Thank you. And thank you for coming this evening. Members, we now move on to our next application, which is application 23/02550 for Madge. This is the Elm Farm at Hampstead Marshall for the demolition of redundant farmstead buildings, construction of a new house, relocation of the barn, change of use of the field area for the relocation of solar panels and significant landscape and biodiversity enhancement. And this has come to committee due to a call in from Councillor Vickers. So again, I will ask Mr Brown and Mr Goddard to do the presentations. Mr Brown, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The application site forms part of a previous wider agricultural holding surrounding Hampstead Marshall that was sold off in 8 separate lots in 2020. The application site, agricultural land, farmhouse, traditional listed barn and converted courtyard buildings of Elm Farm were sold as a single lot, the total area of which comprises 19.53 hectares. The farmhouse, traditional Grade 2 listed barn and converted courtyard buildings of Elm Farm are located to the northeast of the application site, as shown here. Within the blue line area, agricultural land is located to the southeast, south and west of the application site, comprising approximately 17.5 hectares. A public right-of-way runs to the east of the site here and crosses the field to the south of the application site on raised ground here. This plan shows the proposed layout of the site with the existing barns and slurry tank to be removed in grey. The proposed dwelling to be set toward the rear of the site. The relocated and reduced barn to the north, and the area for the proposed relocated ground-mounted solar panels to the northwest of the application site. The existing access is to be upgraded and trees planted along each side. An area of orchard tree planting is proposed in the northeast corner of the site and hedgerow planting to the boundaries of the application site. The barn is to be used to provide storage for agricultural and maintenance machinery in connection with the agricultural land within the applicant's ownership. The light green solid line on this plan represents the proposed residential curtilage for the dwelling, with the area around the barn to remain as agricultural. Here we have a view of the existing access from the road looking south. Members will note the barns in the background and the slurry tank and the roof of the barn can be seen here. This is a view of the existing barn that's to be relocated and reduced by one bay. And the slurry tank in the background that's to be removed, looking southwest. Here we have a view of the barns and slurry tank to be removed, looking south. This is a view from within the site looking north through the existing access onto the road. The location of a proposed barn is in the area here. This is a view from within the site looking east. And another view from within the site looking east. Members will note the grade 2 listed barn in the background. This is a view of the southernmost barn that's to be removed looking south with the proposed dwelling in the approximate location at the front end of this barn. And this is a view of the proposed ground-mounted solar panel site looking northwest. And a view of the agricultural land looking west. This is a view of the proposed rear boundary of residential curtilage, as denoted by the raised hedgerow. This is a view from the public right-of-way to the east, looking northwards. Members will note the barn that is to be removed, upon which the dwelling is located here. And this is a view from the public right-of-way to the south, looking north, with the farm buildings to be removed, and a zoomed-in view there. The main section of the proposed dwelling will be 2.5 stories in height, with 2 single-story elements, one of which would be attached to the dwelling and the other detached to serve as a 2-bed guest annex. The proposed dwelling is considered to incorporate traditional materials and an architectural style in keeping with the area. As set out in the updates report, paragraph 6.8 of the agenda report incorrectly states the height of the existing barn structures on site. The correct maximum heights from ground level of the barns to be removed or relocated are, for barn 1, to be relocated and reduced in size, the existing maximum height is approximately 5.6 metres. This is barn 1 here. For barn 2, located to the south of the site and the location of the proposed dwelling, the existing maximum height is approximately 8.5 metres. For barn 3, located to the northeast of the application site here, the existing maximum height is approximately 7.3 metres. The maximum ridge height of the dwelling as set out in the update report is approximately 9.8 metres, some 1.3 metres taller than the existing barn in the location of which it would be sited. When accounting for the chimneys proposed, the maximum height of the proposed dwelling would be approximately 11.6 metres, some 3.1 metres taller than the tallest barn in the location of which the dwelling would be sited. This provides an elevational view of the proposed relocated solar panels. 203 solar panels would be ground mounted and would be approximately 2 metres tall, covering some 500 square metres, with the remainder attached to the relocated barn's roof. A hedgerow to the southwest of the solar panels is to be maintained at a minimum height of 2 metres. This drawing details the landscape and biodiversity works the applicant intends to do to the wider site on land outside of the application site, but within the ownership of the applicant. The landscape and biodiversity works proposed include new spinneys and scrubland areas, denoted by the number 5 here, new native hedgerows, shown in number 6 here, new parkland trees throughout the fields, a wildflower and hay meadow in the area of number 11, a tawny owl box in number 14, 10 back boxes and the location of number 15, and 10 dormouse boxes in the locations of 16 and 17. For the reasons set out in the agenda report, the principle of the development of a new dwelling and change of use to residential is not in accordance with the local plan and the MPPF. The site is not previously developed land in accordance with the definition in the MPPF and is located in the open countryside and North Wessex Downs national landscape. As set out in the council's adopted development plan, there is a presumption against new residential development outside of settlement boundaries, and the development proposed is not considered necessary to address an identified need or maintain a strong rural economy. In addition, the site is not in a sustainable location for a new residential dwelling, as occupants of the new dwelling would be reliant on the car for access to services and facilities. The residential built form here would be detached from the existing settlement pattern along the road and beyond the general building line of existing residential properties. In respect of the proposed relocated and reduced barn and placement of solar panels on agricultural land, those elements are considered acceptable in principle. The existing structures within the site are visible from the surroundings, particularly from the right-of-way to the south and east of the site, as well as in glimpses from the road. Whilst it is acknowledged that the large existing barns are bulky in scale and not considered attractive in appearance, they are structures commonly found in West Berkshire's rural areas and national landscape. The buildings are of a proportion and materiality that are expected in modern agricultural practice, and as such, the existing barns do not necessarily appear out of place. Whilst the proposed dwelling would not be sited as far south within the site as the existing barn to be removed, its associated residential curtilage would extend beyond the existing barn to an existing raised bank hedgerow. Whilst the proposed dwelling would not be as prominent from the road as the existing barns, its roof and chimneys would be of greater height than the existing barns, and glimpses of that roof form representing domestic development would be possible, particularly in winter. In addition, the appearance of the access from the road would be domesticated through the provision of hard surfacing and trees in a formal linear fashion. The proposal would change the appearance of the site from a working agricultural character to a domestic character, due to the residential built form and spread of domestic paraphernalia associated with the dwelling. Whilst landscaping is proposed within the application site, much of it would be of a formal domestic appearance, altering the character of the site. The domestic appearance of the development proposed, including its curtilage, would encroach into the countryside, harming the rural character and appearance of the area and national landscape. The scale of the proposed dwelling and its curtilage would be greater than existing dwellings in the area, would be detached from the existing pattern of residential dwellings of the settlement of Hampstead Marshall, and introduce a distinct change in character from agricultural to domestic. Therefore, the proposal is not considered to conserve and enhance the character of the area. When balanced against a reduction in built form and complementary appearance of the proposed dwelling, it is considered that the proposed residential development and associated curtilage would result in a moderate harmful impact on the rural character and appearance of the area. Due to the topography of the area and a lack of wide-ranging views of the site, it is considered the harm to the national landscape would be limited. The proposed solar array would introduce development into an area which will not respect or enhance the character of the area. Given the limited views of the solar array that would remain once the landscaping is established, any residual harmful impact on the landscape and character and appearance of the area would be localized and limited. The proposed relocated barn is considered to be in keeping with the character of the area and demonstrates the continuing need for a barn within the site to serve the agricultural holding. In respect of heritage assets, the application site is located in close proximity to a Grade 2 listed oil barn here, and its curtilage listed buildings here. And further afield, the Grade 2 listed post office old post office building here. The proposal has been carefully assessed by the Conservation and Design Officer, who advises that a low level of less than substantial harm would be incurred by the change in use of the site and the further separation, removal of historic agricultural context to the listed barn and farmstead. However, when balanced against the benefits and mitigating factors, such as the reinstatement of the historic orchard, the development proposed would have an overall neutral impact on the setting of the nearby listed buildings. Therefore, having special regard to the desirability of preserving listed buildings and their settings, in accordance with Section 66 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act, the development would have an acceptable effect in terms of heritage assets. There are no concerns in respect of the impact on highways and neighbouring amenity from the proposal. Sufficient drainage measures and biodiversity enhancements within the site could be secured by condition. As previously noted, the applicant is proposing a number of landscaping and biodiversity measures on land outside of the application site, but within their ownership. It is important to note that the landscaping and ecological enhancements on land outside of the application site, with the exception of a new pond, do not require planning permission and therefore could be implemented by the applicants at any time. Furthermore, the granting of this application would not provide permission to construct a new pond on land outside of the application site. In addition, the landscaping and ecological enhancements on land outside of the application site are not considered necessary as a result of the development proposed. Therefore, the public benefit as a result of the proposed landscaping and ecological enhancements on land outside of the application site is given limited weight in favour of the proposed development. The council can demonstrate an adequate housing land supply, and housing delivery over the past years passes the housing delivery test. Further to the in principle unacceptability of the residential development, the proposed development also runs contrary to policy CS13, CS14 and CS19 of the core strategy, as well as policy CS3 of the HSA DPD, due to the unsustainable location of the development, where occupants will be reliant on the motor vehicle for access to services and facilities, as well as the impact on the character and appearance of the area. These policies are up to date and should carry full weight. Determination of this application should be made pursuant to Section 38 of the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act, which requires planning applications to be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. It is acknowledged that the development would provide some benefits in favour of the proposal, comprising a biodiversity net gain of approximately 20% for habitats and 32% for hedgerows within the application site, and ecological improvements to land outside of the application site. Those benefits are considered to attract moderate and limited weight in favour of the proposal respectively. The impact on heritage assets and reprovision of solar panels is considered to have neutral weight for the reasons set out in the agenda report. The application proposal would provide limited economic benefit due to the limited scale of works proposed and would contribute minimally to the provision of housing locally and nationally. As such, those benefits are given limited weight in favour of the proposal. The applicant in their submissions consider the conversion of one of the existing barns to a residential dwelling could be achieved through a separate planning application, such that the principle of a residential dwelling being located within the site is a fallback position representing a material consideration in the determination of this application. As set out in paragraph 6.15 and 6.16 of the agenda report, the applicant has previously sought to obtain planning permission to convert one of the barns to residential, but that application was refused and was not appealed. Permission is sought in this application for the removal of the barns and erection of a new dwelling only, and it is not for members tonight to determine whether a separate planning permission would be granted for converting one of the barns when determining this application. Furthermore, the application site does not benefit from permitted development rights to convert a barn to a residential dwelling. Therefore, this material consideration is only given limited weight in favour of the proposal. Having taken account of all the relevant policy considerations and other material considerations referred to above, it is considered that the application fails to comply with the development plan, and the adverse impacts of the development outweigh those benefits identified. As such, members are recommended, on balance, to refuse the application. The reasons set out in section 8 of the agenda report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that very complete presentation, Mr. Brown. Now move on to Mr. Goddard, please, on highways issues in Hampstead Marshall. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. As Mr. Brown has mentioned, the site is currently occupied by a number of barns with an existing access onto the public highway. The existing access will be retained with the proposal, and the barns will be generally placed with one house, albeit a large one. Suffice it to say, the proposal will reduce traffic movements to and from the site, including the number of large vehicles. The site layout is acceptable from a highways point of view, and therefore your highway officers raise no objection to this proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Goddard. We now come on to the presentations for the attendees this evening, and first up is from the Parish Council, and we have Councillor Anne Budd. Welcome, Councillor Budd. Thank you very much for your patience, and you've now got your opportunity to put the case for your Parish Council. Do start when you're ready.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for giving your consent for me to address you this evening. A special thank you goes to the clerk to the meeting and Thomas. They have shown enormous kindness and sensitivity for my personal well-being. A declaration. To my knowledge, not one parish councillor has been lobbied in support of this application. Also, when we arrived at our decision to support the application, it was done so impartially, independently, and truthfully. The current footprint of the dwelling structure at Elm Farm was not built as a dwelling. It was built as an agricultural outbuilding, functional and constructed for farming purposes. Probably as late as the late 18th century, coming into the 19th century. Several years ago, the structure was transitioned into a conference centre and offices for the Organic Research Centre until it was sold to the applicants. Mr. and Mrs. Oppenheim transformed the conference centre and its shell into a family dwelling. However, it is not ideal as a family home, given the number of transitions and the awkwardness of the restrictive spatial dimensions, which has been inherited. This inheritance is a hindrance to any improvement and development using the same footprint as it is currently. On balance, it would not make sense to develop this structure any further. It would probably resemble add-ons built by children's building bricks, nor does it make financial sense. Furthermore, this approach does not address the other agricultural leftovers. The design for the new dwelling, and taking into account the findings of the planners, which I respect their work, has been intelligently and sympathetically designed as evidenced by the detailed plans to be compatible with the rural landscape. It will be purposely built as a family dwelling and not any other purpose. The position of the new dwelling takes advantage of an outlook that does not hinder or intrude on others, nor having to face onto the road. I wish to remind councillors that in Hampstead Marshall, we suffer from land invasion of various natures. And having the relocation of the dwelling off the road may tend to inhibit such land invasions. Regarding the plans, on first perusal, the plans indicate, a large scheme, which is not surprising given there's a lot going on. Which are the cardinal factors, and these are defendable. I refer to the demolition and clearance of the steel barns and the slurry tank, and the excavation and disposal of the large amounts of concrete.
Councillor Bard, do you have 1 minute left?
Oh, thank you. These structures have to use whatsoever, except being a blot on the landscape and possibly subject to hazardous materials. The extensive habitat recovery will bring the land back to a good state of land management and stewardship. Hampstead Marshall Parish Council unanimous decision to support this scheme remains notwithstanding, as the whole scheme is beneficial to our surrounding rural environment. It is our opinion that this scheme is in all aspects achievable. We are standing by to support all parties in this planning application. In fact, all planning applications. Thank you.
Councillor Bard, perfect timing, thank you. Members, any questions? We have. Councillor Abs.
Yeah, thank you and welcome and very well done.
Thank you. Thank you,
Very
Councillor.
nicely done indeed. You mentioned that about something being converted into a conference centre. Could you clarify on that? I'm a little confused as to. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the site visit because I was in a different part of the country. But
if I may, Chairman, by way of explanation, I first entered the structure 20 odd years ago when it was still a barn. With all the agricultural accoutrements and the odour of cattle. Shortly afterwards, it was sold to the Organic Research Centre as a conference centre with offices. And there was a great deal of bolt-ons adding to the complexity and awkwardness of the design. Does that help?
yes, thank you. I'll get officers to clarify a little bit more later.
Yes.
But thank you.
Just quickly, you talked about land invasions. Could you elaborate what exactly you mean by the land invasions that you think this would help deter?
Well, any large expanse of land is subject to land invasion by hare coursing, by theft, by fire, menace. And these are all very distressing situations. And having the location remain close onto the road just attracts unwarranted negative attention, in my opinion.
Thank you, I see.
No more questions. Thank you, Councillor Budd. Do remain seated there. You're very welcome to stay and listen to the rest of the debate and the outcome of this application.
Thank you, Chair.
You're very welcome. We have no objectors, but we do have a supporter, Mr. Wallace, Nick Wallace. You're very welcome, sir. Come up to the lectern. You have 5 minutes. I'll give you notice as you will have realised 1 minute remaining and 10 seconds I'll say in conclusion.
Great. I'll be fairly brief, really. Myself and my family live opposite the proposed development. And so I feel that of all the people, we're probably more directly impacted by the proposal more than most. We've lived in the area for over 17 years. We wholeheartedly support the application. The primary reasons are these. The site currently consists of a farmyard of redundant buildings. This sadly has largely been underutilised mess for most of the time that we've lived here. Since the last owners broke up and sold the land over a decade ago, it's been largely redundant. It is effectively a disintegrating farmyard full of decrepit buildings and concrete with no farm, hence no function. We very much enjoy living in Hampstead Marshall and are particularly attached to the countryside. We have recognised for a long time that the site in question has not ever, in the years we've been living in Hampstead Marshall, been some kind of bucolic addition to the village. Over the last decade, the visual impact continues to decline. The proposal, in our view, would greatly enhance the village, making a significant impact to the biodiversity net gain in the area, creating a far more aesthetically attractive environment in which to live. We find the reasons suggested for a refusal a little perplexing, even if they are within the policy framework. Primarily because the proposed building would result in the removal of large redundant unused existing buildings and expansive areas of concrete. I fail to see how a decrepit old yard can be described as open countryside. The phrase sustainable is also used. What is more sustainable than an increased biodiversity net gain as opposed to a concrete expanse peppered with redundant steel and concrete and asbestos? To change the appearance from one of a working agricultural character. How is that negative when it serves no farm, it's isolated, and it's currently an ecological blight? And that's pretty much all I've got to say, really.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Wallace. Members, any questions on that presentation? No, I think you've hit the button there. Thank you.
Thank you.
We now come on to Councillor Gaines. All okay? Oh. Thank you for that. We now come on to the agent for this application, Mr. Martin Lay. Good evening, Mr. Lay. Nice to see you. We met at the site meeting, and I understand you have asked Mr. Brown to put up some slides during your presentation. Members, these slides have appeared on the planning file, so they are acceptable. It's not new material, so I've given approval for that to happen. I'll allow you to phase them in as and when, Mr. Brown. Yep, okay. When you're ready, Mr. Lee, you've got 5 minutes and I'll give you notification as I mentioned to you.
Just before I start, may I say, sir, that the slides that Mr. Brown will show are the same slides that were shown to the committee members who kindly visited the site last week.
You're very welcome with that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shall I start now?
When you're ready, we'll start.
My name is Martin Lier. I am agent for Mr. and Mrs. Oppenheim, the applicants. And thank you, Chairman and members, for letting us speak and for your site visit. Your officer report acknowledges that planning determination is a question of balance, weighing up policy and any alleged adverse impacts with benefits and matters that should be taken as material considerations. And therefore, we invite and are glad that this committee will exercise that planning judgment in weighing up benefits against alleged harm. By way of background, when the much larger Elm Farm was sold 4 years ago in 8 lots, the application land was left with all the original but redundant farm buildings. And of the other 7 lots sold, new buildings have been erected on 6 of those lots to serve the needs of that other land. In other words, the Elm Farm buildings aren't needed for any of the other land that was sold away and are redundant other than a small building to be reduced in scale and kept on site for the land at Elm Farm. As for the pre-application consultation submission in 2023, for which there was sadly no council response, the application sets out 2 options. Option A, keep all the buildings and their visual intrusion, reapply to convert 1 or more for residential use, which is policy compliant, and for the remaining buildings to keep them and let them for commercial or workshop or other employment uses with all the traffic generation. Or option B, which is the application for the single dwelling, clearance of the site, and as one of the parish council members said in November 23, have a clean sweep approach for site clearance and massive environmental enhancement. And now to show the boards, I would like to summarise the main benefits. Firstly, clearance of an edge of village eyesore. The buildings are totally redundant, they're large scale, industrial in appearance, and the proposals result in a 75% reduction in volume, 75% reduction in footprint, and 70% clearance of hard standing. This will remove the uncertainty of what will happen to this visually intrusive site. And the replacement will be with an acknowledged high quality design, delivering the highest sustainability and energy credentials and being carbon neutral. We believe there will be an enhanced heritage setting. You can see the orchard to the northeast of the house, closer to the traditional listed barn, rather than modern, ugly agricultural buildings. There will be a reinstated orchard, significantly enhanced wider landscape setting, benefiting the rights of way amenity and the AONB landscape nationally designated. High levels of habitat enhancement and biodiversity net gain, not just on the site of the red line application, but delivering 97% for habitat units and 59% for hedgerow units on the wider Elm Farm land. Now, please, a word on precedent. Some may be fearful that allowing the scheme, not wholly in accordance with policy, will set a precedent, but every precedent has to match another scheme. So if there's another redundant farmstead that can be cleared up in this way and deliver all the benefits of our site, as somebody at the parish council said, bring it on. Now, just mentioning a few comments made by the parish council and others. The parish council said in response, this proposal,
1 minute, Mr. Leo.
This proposal sets a gold standard for this kind of development. One neighbour said it's a very positive proposal for our village and community. Others have said it's sympathetic. Mr. Simon Stone welcomed the increase in biodiversity and was particularly pleased with the reinstatement of the old orchard and water features. So in conclusion, we ask members of this committee to make their own assessment, to weigh up the material considerations and to make a balanced judgment that the benefits for the community, for the environment, for heritage and the AONB landscape outweigh harm. Policy is a not one-size-fits-all set of documents. So even if certain policies are non-compliant, we believe wholeheartedly, as does the local community and 23 people who wrote to support the application, we believe that the significant benefits outweigh any harm, and therefore the House proposal should be preferred. And on this basis, we believe consent should please be granted.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Just stay there 1 minute, please. Councillor Vickers has got a question.
Yeah, you referred early in your presentation to there being two options within this current application, because there's very little reference, if any, to the option A, which I was at the parish council and was firmly rejected in preference to this clear sweep or whatever you call it. So is that true that the other option is in this application?
The other option A was to pursue a new scheme for converting the barn that was refused. And the option A was for that conversion to be 65% smaller than the previous scheme.
Yeah, I understand what it consisted of, but is it part of this application? Because if it isn't, we can't take note of it, really.
It's not. It was put in as the either-or option that we wanted to discuss at pre-app, but now this application is solely for the option B house.
Okay, so we can't really refer to that other option. Thank you.
Only as a fallback position.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Abbs.
Yes, thank you and welcome. I'd like to ask you about page 6 of your presentation and page 7 of your presentation, both of which show solar panels, although there is solar panels in part of the field. I'm curious, you mentioned, because you linked it to sustainability. However, existing, if those panels are still connected and working, and maybe the officers will clarify that for us, there's an awful lot of panels going to be removed. Are they replaced?
Yes. May I point at the?
Are they replaced to the same level? I know where they are. Yes, in that triangle and on the small barn.
Yes. At the moment, all the solar panels are on the southeast face of the big agricultural barn.
So it's the same panels being.
Same number of panels exactly.
Okay, so you're just lifting them off the roof, putting them in the field.
A proportion of them will go on barn one and the rest in the field area.
Thank you for clarifying. That's lovely.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes.
My apologies, I couldn't be at the inspection because I was away on holiday. Just for my clarity, what's proposed on the second floor? It looks like just a blank canvas.
The first floor is bedrooms. The second floor is storage, and with 2 gable end windows for natural light.
Okay. And could I also ask, in terms of the land surrounding the application site, is that going to remain as farmland or what?
Yes, all of the land outside the green line boundary will remain farmland for seasonal sheep grazing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more questions? No, we're all done. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee.
Thank you, sir.
We now come on to the ward members. We have 2, and they're both here with us this evening, Councillor Gaines and Councillor Vickers. Who's going to address us this evening? Councillor Vickers. When you're ready, Councillor.
Members, there's very little I feel I need to add, and we've heard from the applicant, we've heard from the supporter, we've heard from the parish council. But as ward members, and I attended the parish council meeting where they discussed the 2 options at the pre-app stage, and clearly they preferred this clean sweep. I was aware at the time that this was going to be probably difficult when compared with policy, but I note that the officer did say it was a balanced recommendation. And I feel it's my duty as a ward member really to try and do what I can to take it across the line and put the balance the other way. I mean, my views of what would be the end result of this application are the same as the supporters, that it would be an enormous enhancement. And, you know, these things are very subjective. With due respect to our officers, you know, those people that live there, live near there or pass through there, as I do many times, and I think Councillor Gaines does as well. Every time I go past, I think, oh, for goodness sake, can we get rid of those great big barns? They are not nice. The word bucolic was used by the supporter, and I think bucolic is actually what we want. And this new dwelling, which, as you said, has a much smaller footprint and a much smaller bulk than the buildings that were there, although you can see right through them. Technically, they could be, you know, the volume of the building is you know, bounded by the base of the 4 walls. Interesting, this weekend I was attending a conference by the Countryside Commission. They were sponsoring, and there was a discussion about the future of farming. And I think it's relevant here. The trend is, and I'm not a farming expert, but I was told that the trend is, with climate change, we are more or less self-sufficient in meat, and we need more high quality meat to meet those that can afford it, that will be fewer food miles and less of the industrial type of feedstock for food. Now the land in the south area of our ward, as the highways officer has said, is not really suitable for HGVs. So if the result of this is that there will be no agricultural use of these very large barns, which were for storage of large amounts of feed, whereas we've now got a smaller barn that will meet the needs of the type of agriculture that the applicants want to use in their part of what was the Elm Farm estate. And I think it's all good. It is strange that we have to call this greenfield land when it's solid concrete virtually. And, you know, I think the residents of Hampstead Marshall would be dismayed if we can't give this consent And I think we owe it to them to try and achieve that. A couple of points that weren't brought up in the agenda report, which have occurred to me, might help members. It said that the proposed building will be out of keeping with those in the neighbourhood, which is actually depends on what you call a cluster of buildings. There's no settlement boundary, so there's no clear boundary, but there are more than 10 buildings at various different spaces within this part of Hampstead Marshall. And amongst them at the north end is White Hill Farm, which has a huge curtilage and which is a very large building. Further away, you have Craven House, which is again a mansion. So it's not unusual in this parish, let alone the rest of the ward, to have a few of these very large buildings. So I don't think the building proposed is out of keeping with the local area at all. And if we can get over the in principle objection that there is no need, admittedly, one building is not going to make much of a dent in our housing need, but we have over the horizon with the new government a massive increase in our housing demand, which we might need to start thinking about. So as somebody who knows the whole national landscape, AONB, very well, and I walk many footpaths beyond into Wiltshire and Hampshire, I've seen many of these modern, ugly barns replaced by individual dwellings. So maybe it's the fact that our policy is not quite consistent with the policy of our neighbours. And I think that's a pity, but there we are.
In conclusion?
I think in conclusion, I'm looking to you members to try and help the local residents get the outcome they desire, but without breaching our policies.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Any questions? Yes, we do. Councillor Gaines.
Councillor Vickers, I'm so pleased that you mentioned the AONB. So I was trying to work out how I was going to attach this question. So therefore the proposed development doesn't accord with North Wessex Downs AONB position statement housing or the management plan 2019 to 2024. Now you're part of that AONB. So what do you say to that?
Well, I haven't found anything specific, and maybe the officers can help us here. The AONB management plan almost sort of devolves planning policy matters to the individual 7 planning authorities that comprise it. And one of its aims in the new management plan, which we're starting to prepare, is to try and find a way of bringing some consistency across those planning authorities so that there is a sort of common brand to the whole area. And it's quite a difficult task when I think we've got more planning authorities involved with this particular national landscape, stroke AONB, than any other in England. So it's one of the challenges we face. But I haven't been able to find anything specific within the AONB management plan that really strongly is against this. And it all is down to we've got to plan for the future. And we are in a climate emergency. We've got baked in change in global temperatures, and farming is going to have to adapt to that. So looking at buildings that were put up 50 years ago in the AONB and saying they've got to stay, we've got to find a new use for them, I don't think is realistic.
Thank you.
Any more questions? No. Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Councillor Vickers, get seated, and then the next item we're going to do is ask questions of Mr. Brown or Mr. Goddard, and Councillor Abbs is straight in.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chairman. Last week we had a district planning meeting. Last week we were asked to consider something that was some of us thought were brownfield site, and basically the same policy reasons that this is being suggested to be refused on came to district planning when we all went, yeah, we're a planning-led authority. We might, even though the local residents are in support of it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we have to refuse it because it breaks the rules. What's the difference here?
Mrs. Inston, I think you've got the answer to this.
Thank you, Chair. Well, technically there isn't really a difference because they're both policies in our local plan that prevent new housing, that limit new housing in the countryside. Obviously with the last application, there was an appeal decision which carried significant weight with it. So in that way, there's a difference there in terms of material considerations that we were taking, that we were having to consider. But technically, the application is contrary to our spatial strategy policy in the local plan. So it is.
Does that mean it's going to end up at district planning again if we approve it?
That's something that the development manager, I would need to seek advice from the development manager on.
Thank you very much.
I think the difference also is that, as Mr. Brown said, this application is in the balance as opposed to weighted. Gives some indications.
Could we have Mr. Brown clarify?
We can indeed,
on
yeah.
the balance argument.
Well, if that is a question, or Mrs. Inston will answer that, yeah.
One further difference between the two applications in terms of balancing and material considerations are there is a designated heritage asset adjacent to this application, and so it is a material consideration in planning decisions of any applications that may enhance the setting of a designated heritage asset is a material consideration. That wasn't the case with the last application. So there is an additional material consideration which officers have given limited weight to.
But did I not understand that the weighting was such that this would, leaving it as it is, changing it harms the heritage, or did I misunderstand the officer's presentation?
It was neutral weight. The harm of losing the agricultural use of that site is weighed against the benefits of re-establishing the historic orchard that was once there. So the harm weighed against the benefit. The conservation officer, and I concur with their assessment, it equaled neutral impact.
If I may, Chairman, I'd really like guidance on if we do refuse, there's likely to be an appeal because obviously the person has the funds to do this type of thing. What are our chances at an appeal? Are the officers confident enough in their recommendation?
I don't think that they really want to. Do you want to make a comment on that? You're happy to?
Yeah, I mean, officers are confident in their recommendation. We've assessed all the different, we've looked at the material considerations, and we've given weight to each one, limited weight to the various material considerations in terms of enhancement of the designated heritage asset and the biodiversity enhancements around the site. We've acknowledged them, but given limited weight to them. So we are comfortable with our recommendation, and we feel that we would be able to defend it quite easily at appeal.
Members, it's my opinion that the threat or possible appeal shouldn't really influence our decisions. We make our decision on the information that we've received tonight, and if it goes to appeal, it goes to appeal. I know there is a financial burden on the council, should it go, but I think we're here to make a decision on the information and how we feel about this application. Councillor Vickers, you've got...
Yeah, I mean, quite agree with that point. It has annoyed me over the years when officers actually kind of sort of stress that point, and I'm grateful that officers tonight have not, they've said it's balanced, and they've said, although they're confident they win an appeal, they don't want an appeal, they don't expect one necessarily. I would just say you've said the officers have assessed weight as being neutral, and for example, the heritage impact on the heritage asset, and the number of other places in the paper, officers have given us their assessment of the weight. My question is, we are at liberty, are we not, to have a different opinion as to the absolute or relative weight? Where it becomes difficult, though, is on an in principle basis. So, would you say that even if we could review, we could overturn and dismiss second reason for refusal, which is all about impact on the character, etc., that really we've got to address our concerns to the in principle, the fact that we are replacing an agricultural site, we are turning it into a residential site, because that seems to be a lot of emphasis in the report on that. And the emphasis, to my mind, is leading us very much towards the refusal answer. So that leads on to the change in nature of farming, which is not really considered in the agenda report. We've heard, well, you heard from me and indirectly. I mean, I wondered if any officers have an opinion on what constitutes conserving and enhancing landscape in a changing climate, with all that that means in challenging the nature of the rural economy and the way farming is practiced.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to draw members' attention to paragraph 6.3 of the agenda, where the case officer has drawn attention to the fact that the applicant submitted a commercial use appraisal for the existing barns, and it was considered there to be a strong demand for rural commercial workshop or storage units, and advises the existing barns are suitable for such uses, subject to some upgrading. So the information submitted with the application hasn't demonstrated that the barns are redundant for agricultural purposes. And I don't know if Jake can clarify that.
I've got nothing really to add to that. There was a commercial appraisal that was undertaken by, I think, Carter Jonas that went through and established those points. I would just like to add about the changing nature of farming. There is nothing to stop the applicants demolishing some of these barns and turning the land back into grazing land to add to additional farming land. And that would obviously conserve and enhance the character of the area.
Councillor Abbs next.
Yeah, sorry to come back in again. I've just, the officers, please clarify for me. I mean, initially we were shown 8 plots of land and they were sold off separately, and then it seemed to indicate that the owner of the person that's looking with this application seems to own the land because they're going to plant trees on them. So is it all their ownership of these 8 plots that were sold? And then someone else mentioned in a presentation that there were an even bigger farm at some point, and those plots, 6 have had houses built on them. What's the reality here? Who owns what? And you know, because if we've had 6 different buildings already done in the same area, then the precedence has been set, hasn't it?
You want to come back on that, or we just look what's in this application? Ready?
Yeah, we're just looking at this application. I'm not aware of any examples. I'm not sure if it was, I don't know of any nearby new dwellings that have been allowed in similar circumstances.
It was mentioned that this was part of the old farm, so I think assumes it's reasonably near.
I think what was mentioned in terms of new residential use is the conversion of the listed barn to residential.
Yeah, I can clarify from local knowledge, if I may, Chairman. I mean, it wasn't clear from Councillor Budd's presentation to those who might not know the area, but the barn she was talking about is the old barn, the heritage asset that is within the courtyard next door, and the farmhouse, which she was also saying can't be expanded and isn't suitable for modern family living. That is, I'm not sure that's a listed structure. I think it's part of the original farm, but I don't think it's
not listed in its own right, no, Councillor, but we would consider it of local heritage significance.
Yes,
as a non-designated heritage asset,
but
it's not listed in its own right.
Exactly. So there are 3 heritage assets. There's the old post office over the road, which is only about 100 metres away from the site, if that. And then there's the farmhouse, which is a non-listed heritage access. And then there's the listed structure, which is the old barn, which became a conference centre, if that helps other members.
Thank you, Councillor.
And in terms of the wider ownership, Elm Farm, as it originally was a very large holding, which probably had nearly half the whole parish. But as was explained, I think 7 out of the 8 parcels now have their own agricultural buildings, barns, whatever, but they don't have dwellings on those sites like this one proposes to have. new
Thank you,
developments.
Councillor Vickers. I now move on to Councillor Gaines quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question for Mr. Brown. It's just for clarification because I think Councillor Vickers just alluded to it. There was a planning application for the conversion of the former research laboratory, which was approved back in 2020. Is that the other building that we were talking about, or is that the building on that site?
No, that is the listed barn that we're talking about that's adjacent to this site.
Right, thank you.
It's of a kind of a U-shaped form at the moment.
I've got one question very quickly to, I guess, Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, there seems to be concern over the height of this new development over the barns. I noticed on one of your lay-on representations up there that the existing farmhouse, am I right in saying, is higher than the proposed development? It did look like it in the picture.
Sorry, Chairman, the existing
The
farmhouse
existing
that-
farmhouse. I think is that not shown in that view where you've laid the barn over and then you show behind it the new development with the chimney and all the rest of it. But the house to the right there, I think, am I right? I'm a bit of a
I
way
noted
away.
down the title of that slide, Chairman, actually. I think it's the one you mean.
Yeah.
Proposal overlaid
Yeah.
with existing.
You could just have a look
which I
at
think
that.
was very, useful to see.
Sorry, I've just had a look at the plan and no, it doesn't look to show the existing farmhouse on site. It only shows the
Okay.
barn.
That's the
That- oh,
one.
the
That's
overlay.
one. Now, what's that building on the right there? Those white chimneys.
I think that's the White Hart.
Oh, that's the white.
Oh, that is the
behind it.
farmhouse.
Okay, it's not the farm.
Yeah, the White House is a bit further to the right, I think,
Okay,
off the
thank you very
picture.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, I just want to point out, this isn't actually to scale. This was
Oh, I see.
a generated image that was provided by the applicants as part of their application submission.
A
So
bit misleading.
it's to
Yeah.
give an indication, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Chairman, while it's up there, I think one could note if you were viewing it from the viewpoint that the photo was taken at or anywhere.
Is
up
this a
the hill.
question to one of the officers? We don't want to stray into too
Okay.
much debate. You can bring this up later, maybe.
Can I bring it
Yeah,
up later? I think
please.
it probably is more
Yeah,
appropriate.
yeah,
for the-
otherwise we're going to run. One other question is, obviously the concerns of the height of this new structure over the barns. Maybe you'd just enlighten the committee on the practicalities or not of lowering the datum of construction, which may be a consideration. I don't want to get into the debate. Let's put a stop to that now.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, as I've indicated in my presentation and in the update report, the highest point of the ridge of the proposed dwelling would be approximately 1.3 metres tall in existing barn. If you include the chimneys, that'll increase to 3.1 metres taller. However,
Not correct, some respect. That's not correct.
however, if members were minded to approve the application, there is the ability to put on a condition requiring details of existing and proposed ground levels that would enable some levelling of the ground and possibly some reduction in height relative to the existing barns of the proposed dwelling, i.e. being sat down into the site more. But we wouldn't want to see any significant change in the ground levels comprising of meters or more, because then we would start needing engineering works such as retaining walls, and those types of works should really be assessed as part of this application.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I think you've covered that. That's fine. Thank you. No more detail. Okay, members, we'll quickly move on to the debate. And again, I'll just give some indication so we can focus our minds on what we're considering here this evening. And that is the principle of the development, the design, character and appearance, the historic environment, impacts on highways, neighbouring amenity, flooding and drainage, biodiversity and landscaping, and the sustainable construction. So who would like to open up the debate? Well done, Councillor Abbs. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't mind starting. The issue I'm having is the offices for me are not, the map said on balance, but they're very clear. And we have had a very recent case which seems to be, in my mind, exactly the same as this one. And I know which way I voted on that one. So if there's no significant difference, I'm not sure I can vote a different way on this way. However, I would say I'm not totally convinced by the lack of sustainability. There's bus stops of the White Hart. So, yeah, you've got a bus route literally right outside the development here. So in terms of sustainability, people have to drive it. Well, they could catch the bus actually because there's a bus stop. But in terms of what's being designed, it's a big property. It's, I think, Councillor Wollaston pointed out that it's got a floor that could easily be more than it currently is. And we've certainly seen some developments in West Berkshire that start off quite big and then just get bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm sure you all know the one I'm referring to because I think it's in the same parish. But so I think I'll listen a bit more, but I'm minded to, unfortunately stick with officer's recommendation because it's policy and we're supposed to be policy driven. So change the policies if we want, but if we've got them, unfortunately we have to follow them.
So I will say, Councillor Vickers, this committee has got Councillor Abbs. Sorry, I was going to call Councillor Vickers to speak, but Councillor Abbs, I always say this committee's got a tolerance of plus or minus 5–10% on our policies. If we go 10.5%, then we're down district. So we do have some flexibility should we consider to apply it. Anyway, Councillor Vickers.
Yeah, I think there are big differences between this and the last one. The one similarity is that it's the in principle objection. It's technically in open countryside and therefore basically end of story, unless you can find very good reasons. Well, I think there are some much better good reasons to this. You've touched on one, which is there is a bus route here. And the other one, I think what you've alluded to, some of these instances where an applicant has gone bit by bit and, gradually added to what they're building. This one, I think, is honest in the sense that they are going straight for what is quite, a large building, a statement building. But whereas, the last one we had at District was hidden within a wood and was anything but a statement. It was trying to not be noticed. But I would think, members, that if we approach this, if we can leave it at just the in principle, I think a lot of the opinions expressed by officers that give certain weights to the impact of the proposal upon the neighbouring amenity and upon the environment, I would give a much more positive stance on that. And I just don't agree with the impact on the character of the appearance at all once you've got over the fact that this is currently an agricultural building, and so anything that's residential is a negative. But that's the in principle issue rather than the detail. So I don't know whether other members agree with me, but I think it is said in the report that there are no direct views of the new building from the listed buildings. It's also said, there's this what seems to be a contradictory statement about the fact that it's not within the building line, and yet there is no building line round here. So the fact that it's located considerable distance back from the road doesn't seem to be relevant. It's the fact that it's a dwelling rather than a farm, because the farm buildings are way back from the road, and we've heard from the parish council that the fact that it's not being overlooked by residents, that the redundant farm buildings, that is something that is a worry to the local community, that you could have invasions, as she said.
Thank you. Councillor Foote.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. My position is really exactly the same as Councillor Vickers, I think, on this. Clearly, it is tricky because we live in a beautiful part of the world. There is the AONB and there are the policies that the officers have set out. But to me, this actually enhances the environment. We've got support from local residents, as I believe was the case with the previous district planning case that we've alluded to. I think that we're enhancing the biological net gain, the environmental credentials. I think we may be overlooking the fact that these days more and more people are turning to electric vehicles. I don't think we're talking about petrol, fossil fuel driven vehicles on the way in and out of town. And I've cycled past this site many times myself, so there's no harm in cycling into Newbury. So I think also for me, what is very significant is the parish council have endorsed this and supported this application. And whilst I fully respect the position of the officers in outlining what the policy is, I think the common sense approach is that this can only enhance the area, and I wouldn't recommend that we refuse it. I think I would personally support the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wollaston next, then Councillor Gaines.
Thank you. I'm going to say something similar to Councillor Foote. It seems to me that we have a parish council who don't just say no objection, they actually say they support it. And I think we should put some weight behind that. Similarly, Mr. Wallace, who lives very close to it, is fully supportive as well. I think we have to bear in mind the impact on the general environment. And much as I fully understand officers' recommendations based on policy, I think there are times when we have to have, as Councillor Foote said, a more common sense approach. So I will be supporting.
Councillor Gaines.
I'm going to be a little bit controversial then, because looking at 6.3, it does say, furthermore, the applicant has submitted a commercial use appraisal for the existing barns, which considers there to be a strong demand for rural commercial workshop storage units, and advises that existing barns are suitable for such uses. So we are trying to take one house in the countryside and remove all the barns, which have got potential for a rural economy. We've got things like ironmongery, wood turning, all those sorts of things in the countryside, which would be a much better use than a house. Now, I'm not saying I still haven't decided whether I'm going to support or refuse, but the other thing is we are going against AOMB policy and 3 of our own policies to do this. But I'm minded the fact that actually one of the things that Councillor Vickers said when he stood up there was we've got a real issue with farming. We've got a real issue with rural economy. What we're going to do now is put a 4-bedroom house in the middle of a farm where we could have barns which could be used for agricultural use. So as I say, ironmongery, wood turning, all those sorts of things we could have. And it'd be very sad if we just put a house in there when we could actually inflate the local economy.
Thank you. So part of our debate, I haven't heard any suggestion of wavering towards possibly approving this with any conditions. So if anybody has shown some interest in 2, 3 possible areas you might consider, if we're going down that route before it's too late, what would just sway it in terms of conditions?
Chairman, I'd like to propose that we reject the officer's recommendation and give this approval.
Mrs. Inston.
Thank you, Chair. Members are just advised that they will need to be very clear in their reasons for approving this application, why the particular circumstances of this site are such that they would weigh against the policies in the local plan. So they'd need to be very clear in terms of the weight they were given to the material planning considerations and how they outweigh the development plan policy.
That sits with you, I think, at the moment, Councillor Wollaston. I'm sure we'll get some help from Councillor Vickers. We've got the reinstatement of an historic orchard.
That is a start. I would also say the greater than necessary or greater than required biodiversity enhancements even within the site, and the orchard's part of it, even within the red line, but certainly within the blue line. But I'm not sure we can take much account of what's in the blue line because we can't enforce it, even if it's if you like, a sort of unilateral offer. I don't know whether officers would advise on that being capable of being taken into account. But I think the primary one to me is that we believe it does conserve and enhance the local environment. It is removing an eyesore, removing an awful lot of concrete, and just doing that is a biodiversity enhancement, getting rid of all that.
Councillor Wilson, you want to come back?
Yes, it just seems to me that we have, as has been said by others, an absolute eyesore here. And however much you try and get it for wood turning, whatever else everybody wants to do with it, it's going to remain an eyesore. And I just think we have to take account of the local people's views, even if that is slightly against policy.
Let Mrs. Ince come back on that, if I may, and then I'll come back to Councillor Foot.
Thank you, Chair. Again, members just need to be very clear as to why, because obviously we need to be, members need to be aware that we have a lot of barns across the district, similar barns, similar sizes. So how this site differs, so we can distinguish it from other, so we're not in a situation where every application assessed on its own merits, but what we don't want to do is, if there is another site of the same circumstances, same physical constraints, we don't want to set a precedent in that sense. We need to be very clear how this site is different to where the particular circumstances of this site. And I know members have mentioned the reinstatement of the historic orchard because of the enhancement on the setting of the Grade 2 listed barn.
I mean, I think different circumstances to other barns that I've seen on my rovings around the district. Most of them sit within existing large farming units. This has now been broken up into a much smaller farming unit than it was built for. 1/8 the size, approximately, we understand. And therefore, that's a circumstance that has, I think you could say, has led, it may not be a planning thing, but it's, it's ownership, it's something out with our control as a planning authority, but it's happened. We can't undo that. And it's allowed a building to deteriorate, which even if you built another wood turning shop or something, I cannot imagine those structures being turned into something that is agricultural without unreasonable expense. And I don't know whether the fact that it would cost a lot is a factor, but it's a fact even if it's not a planning factor. So I think we'd be turning away a gift horse in the mouth really by refusing this.
Thank you. Councillor Abbs first, and it's Councillor Foot.
I was similarly going to ask, we were talking about barns, then examples, we'll just go up the road a few yards into the one on the right, which would be essentially allowable under what you're about to pass.
Thank you. Councillor Foot.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Could I ask the officer if, I think it was mentioned that there was an argument for the fact that the proposed house would enhance the heritage barn next door. And as things stand at the moment, we have a heritage barn, and as Councillor Vicker has said, a collection of eyesore derelict barns adjacent to it. So if this were permitted, this application, would that not enhance that site? And could we put that in as a reason to support Councillor Williston's recommendation to approve this application? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Foot. Yes, members, it is within your gift to give weight to that consideration. Officers, as set out in the report, have given it limited weight. Members, obviously, it is within your gift to take a different stance and give it greater weight.
Let me pick up, Chairman, on the remarks of the highways officer that by allowing this, we would actually reduce the potential HGV movements within the area on what are fairly minor, unsuitable roads. Most HGVs for any sort of use would be crossing the, through Kintbury Village with its narrow streets. And this is one of the constraints that preserves the rural nature of the south part of our ward. The fact that you've got to cross the railway and go through narrow streets in the villages. So it was actually mentioned by the highways officer, and it could be put in the scales, as it were, to weigh in favour of an approval, I would have thought. Would that be right?
The impact on the local road network isn't, I don't think from what Paul Goddard has said, isn't an issue at the moment, and there might be less road traffic movements with the dwelling, but it wouldn't be, officers wouldn't advise members as that being a particularly strong material consideration to give weight to.
May I add something, Chairman? I mean, if we're going to go down that thinking that, by having a house, we get rid of tractors and lorries and things like that, well, let's not have any farming in the countryside then, because unfortunately, that's the nature of having a rural economy. They will need transport and they will need things to move things around. Adding it in as a reason to approve seems to set another precedent or dangerous.
Albeit it's a redundant farm and has been for a long time, but take your
Yes,
point.
but as Councillor Gaines pointed out, it is down in the report as saying these could be used for rural economy.
Okay, Councillor Vickers.
Well, we're often told that with applications that are redundant buildings, whether it's in settlements or outside, that the impact on the transport, you have to look at what could happen in terms of transport impacts under the existing use, even if that building is redundant. Now, here we have a case, but by changing the existing use from industrial to residential, you are reducing the numbers of HGVs that are likely to use the road network, which certainly for the residents would be a benefit. But I question what Councillor Abbs has said, because smaller farm units don't tend to generate these very large tractors and farm vehicles and transport of goods in and out, compared with the large industrial farms that we have in most of the districts on the downlands.
Thank you. Councillor Wollaston.
Isn't there differentiated between other possible changes of uses or demolition of barns? This is actually close to a pub, which I believe is closed, but it's still close to a pub. And there are other residential units quite close to it.
Members, it's not my position to try and influence the committee or its decision, but at the start of the debate, I did go through the issues of consideration, and I'll just remind ourselves of what they are. Principles of a development, that's where the majority of this discussion has ended. Design, character and appearance, I think, in my opinion, not to influence, in my opinion, are acceptable. The historic element seems to be acceptable. The impact on highways is acceptable. The neighbouring amenity seems to be acceptable. Flooding and drainage is not an issue. Biodiversity and landscaping, I think they've excelled themselves. And sustainable construction. So when we're looking on balance, there's an awful lot going for it. And this one niggle, are you going to apply the plus or minus 5% on the principle of development? So I've got a proposer. I think it's time we made our mind up on this one. I'm looking for a second, and I'm going to put this to the vote.
I'm happy to second this, Chairman, and I think what you've listed is very helpful. I would say that all those you listed, apart from the in principle, are net positive, some of them quite substantial, like the biodiversity. But that doesn't help us with conditions. And I'm afraid I haven't come prepared with conditions, and I normally look to officers to help on that. But there are, I imagine, a number of standard ones. Do we need to vote before we go through the conditions, or?
We need to do the conditions before we vote. I think, we shouldn't be, putting ourselves in a hair shirt in the fact that we can't find any conditions, because we might be quite happy with what's in front of us, and there's very little we'd like to do. We've got all the back boxes, we've got all the biodiversity. The only issue was the height. We've discussed whether or not we lower the datum. and the practicalities of that, which I don't think is something that we can impose.
Would it be
Councillor
possible?
Vickers is going to come in possibly with a.
Well, I was going to add give you at least one condition.
Thank you.
So that remove any further development rights within the red line.
That's a very good. That's a very good starting point. And
Sure, we'd have all the standard conditions on method statement for building and times of construction, all that sort of stuff.
Mrs. Inson, she'll cover that. I think we've got everything on construction and construction plans and.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be useful for members, but Jake will be able to run through. Jake has components in the event that members were minded to approve the application. See,
At least about that. Every good office should do that when they get the wind.
Over to you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Please bear with me. I've got a number of conditions. First of all, we have a commencement of development within 3 years. We have a condition on approved plans. We have a condition requiring demolition and construction environmental management plan that does deal with protecting biodiversity during construction, as well as access arrangements, wheel washing facilities, measures to control dust, dirt, noise, etc. We have a tree protection scheme condition proposed, an updated ecology survey condition, as the ecology survey that was submitted is quite a bit old now, and there can be protected species that move around before development commences. I would also suggest a ground levels and finished floor levels condition with the expectation that there is some lowering of the proposed dwelling. A sustainable drainage condition, wanting to require precise details of the sustainable drainage that is to be provided. A materials condition, requiring a detailed schedule of all materials before any development above ground takes place. That's all finishes visible to the external of the building. We'd require a hard surface materials condition, again, a schedule before development above ground. External joinery, windows and doors conditions to require full details of the doors and windows and their reveals. A lighting design strategy for light sensitive biodiversity and to ensure the National Landscape Dark Skies. Details of that prior to any erection of external lighting. Biodiversity measures. So we can actually put conditions on there requiring the delivery of items proposed within the blue line. So we would require the tawny owl box, the bat boxes, the dormouse boxes to be installed prior to occupation. Soft landscaping, again, soft landscaping within the site and within the blue line site. Precise details of the densities, species, etc., and management plans of those. Surfacing of the access required to be bonded for a distance of 5 meters back from the carriageway. The parking to be brought into existence prior to the occupation of the dwelling. Details of electric vehicle charging points. Compliance with the biodiversity method statements that have been submitted, particularly around construction. Sustainable construction. Compliance with the energy and sustainability statement that was submitted. Hours of work restrictions during construction and demolition. And permitted development restricting any extensions, alterations, or buildings within the grounds of the dwelling. And then finally, a condition restricting the curtilage to that set out in the plan that I detailed earlier by the solid green line. Those are conditions that officers would recommend.
Is it still liable as well, or does this?
Sorry, say again, Councillor.
Is it still
Do
liable?
put your hand up, please, because Councillor Abbs wanted to speak there actually, and Councillor Wollaston.
I just want to add an archaeological required.
There was no request from the archaeological officer for a condition.
Thank you. Councillor Abbs?
Yeah, I was wondering whether we could add in that the current EV capacity, which looks about 65 kilowatts to me, if
Okay.
I've calculated, is maintained or increased.
Do we impose that, Mr.
Can
Brown?
we? Yes, the question is, can we put that
Yeah.
condition?
Yep.
Yep.
Councillor Vickers?
Yeah, I asked the question about sill because I'm just wondering, I mean, this is not a self-build application, and therefore I imagine it's still liable, isn't it? If it was approved.
As set out in paragraph 35 of the 3.5, sorry, of the report, it is it appears to be seal liable, but it will be formally confirmed by the seal charging authority.
This is self-build, no sill, is that right?
No.
Can you?
Sorry, not that we've been informed of. No.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, good point. Councillor Gaines?
Just a question about the being adjacent to the listed building. Can we sort of do something about, I mean, you did mention materials and windows, etc. Can we be very specific about the materials being used on that one? I mean, we did talk earlier on about, you know, handmade bricks and things. I'm not suggesting 1 second you do that, but something that actually does enhance the listed building adjacent to it.
Yes, I mean, the condition we're recommending for a schedule of external materials, we would ensure when those details are submitted, that the materials are of high quality and suitable for that site and respect the adjacent listed barns. And we could also, I don't know if Jake mentioned it on there, is a condition for eaves and fascia details. And I probably recommend an eaves and fascia just to ensure detailing around the eaves is traditional detailing and high quality materials. We would be able to ensure that. Thank you.
Can I confirm that, who was it, permitted development rights, councillor Abbs, that's been included. I've mentioned this before on industrial sites, agricultural sites and traveller sites. I'll ask your opinion, Mr. Brown, whether or not we ought to look at a land contamination survey, both with the storage of agricultural fertilisers, etc., diesel. I'm just concerned, I don't do it to be awkward. I do it to safeguard West Berks Council's interests in the fact that if we don't ask for that and contamination is found and it needs cleaning up, where that liability lie. We had this, if you remember, in Hungerford, where the whole site had to be excavated and yeah, because that contamination hadn't been considered.
Thought it was because he lied. Thought that's all because the applicant lied about the estate, but it.
Chairman, the application site has been reviewed by the environmental health team, who've raised no concern about contaminated land, but we could put what's commonly known as an unexpected contamination condition on there. Should contamination be found, then they would have to do an assessment at that point and any potential remediation.
So members, are we happy with those conditions, extensive as they are, most of which were in our pack? We just needed reminding of them. So I do have a proposer, Councillor Wollaston, and a seconder. Miss Noley and Miss Inster, Mr. Brown were quite happy with all those conditions. They are listed. Therefore, the recommendation is to delegate the development manager to grant planning permission subject to conditions stated in the agenda before us and the additional conditions identified during the debate and thereafter. This is for application number 23/02550 full Madge at Elm Farm at Hampstead Marshall for the demolition of a redundant farmstead building, construction of a new house, relocation of a barn, change of use of a field area for the relocation of solar panels, no increase in output, and significant landscape and diversity enhancement. Miss Noley, will you please carry out the vote?
Can I have members in favour, please? Against?
Thank you, members. That application is granted. And congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Oppenheimer. And I wish you the very best in your development. And hope all goes well. My goodness, you've got some conditions to get your teeth into there. I think the only thing that can be worse than this is taking on a listed building, to be honest. Best of luck. Right, let's move on. Anybody who need a break? It's 9:20. We do. 5 minutes. It will be 5 minutes.
Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you. Last application this evening is application number 24/01602. This is Reg 4 for the Northbrook Leisure Centre at Newbury, and this is for a proposed new single-storey entrance lobby and canopy, new entrance facade, new door window openings, and new rooftop plant. This has come to committee due to being a West Berks Council application, and there were also 5 letters of objection, which is the level that if it's a council application, it's 5, not 10. So for this one, Mrs. Instant is going to do the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I won't run through what the application is for, as thank you, Chair, you've done that. So I will go straight on to the location. The site is, as members are probably familiar with, Northbrook Leisure Centre. It's outside of the settlement boundary, but it is within the Newbury Conservation Area. Photograph here of the front entrance, looking towards the front entrance, and the next, oops, I'm going the wrong way. And a close-up, as you can see, the red brick building, white aluminium windows, white cladding at the front. Not particularly attractive. And then to the front of it as well, just to the, as you're looking at the entrance, just to the right-hand side, you have a single-storey extension to the front with high-level white aluminium windows. The application proposes a range of alterations. And I move to the front elevation, to the north-facing elevation of the leisure centre. A single-storey extension and canopy covering 45 square metres is proposed to the front and would project 3.5 metres ahead of the original entrance, above which is a sandy ochre yellow aluminium rain screen cladding, which would replace the existing red brick and white cladding at the first floor level. The extension would be glazed and with new openings would have black-grey aluminium frames. The signage would be in a grey silver on top of the cladding, and there would also be signage on the front, on the brickwork to the front of the leisure centre, just here. Additional openings are proposed to be added to the side elevations of the existing single-storey block. As you can see, from large openings here, and again here, and then on the other side, some additional openings. The openings are all going to be grey aluminium to match the front entrance, and any existing frames across the building will be sprayed grey to match the new frames. The roof of the roof conservatory here is also to be replaced with a solid grey roof. Alterations to the approach to the entrance are also proposed, and you can see on this plan as well, the front lobby entrance here at the top, and it will have a canopy extending out over the existing bike racks. As you're looking at it, the bike racks are just to the right. And the proposed, the alterations to the approach are also comprising a mix of black and grey paving to replace the existing tarmac and the addition of bollards. Bike racks, etc., are to remain as existing. The application site boundary includes flood zones 2 and 3. However, the only new structure proposed, which is the front lobby, would be outside of these zones. Surfacing alterations would affect existing hard standing, and the existing planters would be retained. The site is less than 1 hectare, and no part of it is at risk from flood from surface water. Therefore, a detailed flood risk assessment is not required in this instance. The SUDS officer has been consulted and is satisfied that the proposal would not increase flood risk on the site or elsewhere, and accords with policy CS 16. As part of the proposal as well, the roof plan here shows new external plant air handling plant on the roof, including some air source heat pumps on the roof as well. These would not generally be visible from views of the building from the ground within the conservation area due to their siting within the roof. And where there may be limited views from longer distance, it would be consistent with the function of the building. In terms of consultation responses, members' attention is drawn to section 4.1 of the committee report. In summary, no objections have been received from any consultees. The environmental health team have requested the submission of a noise impact assessment, determine what, if any, mitigation measures are required in relation to the proposed installation of the new roof plant. And this is recommended to be secured via condition. That's condition 4 in section 8 of the report. 12 letters of objection have been received, all of which raise just one issue, and that being the loss of the 2 squash courts, which are to be replaced with studios for group exercise classes. Members' attention is drawn to the fact that replacing the squash courts with the sports studios would be an internal operation, and it would not alter the overall use of the building as a leisure centre. The loss of the squash courts would thus not constitute development and therefore does not require planning permission. So whilst the concern of the objectors is acknowledged, it is not a material planning consideration and therefore cannot be taken into account in the determination of this application. There are no updates to report for this application. And to conclude, the officers consider that the works would result in an enhanced and more contemporary appearance to the building, making it more attractive and inviting, and as well as providing more active frontage due to the increased glazing, enabling views into and out of the building's entrance. It's considered that this proposal would not demonstrably harm the amenity of neighbouring residential properties or the character and appearance of the conservation area. So having taken account of all the relevant policy considerations and other material considerations referred to in the report, officers recommend this application for approval subject to conditions set out in section 8. The report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Inston. Mr. Goddard, I'm really looking forward to hearing your contribution on the effect this is going to have on highways. It's over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. As you've suggested, there's no impact on car parking or cycle provision. The canopy will provide some undercover provision for this existing cycle stands that are there. So, no, your highway officers have no objection to this proposal. Thank you.
That's very nice to hear. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our presentations of our attendees. And again, Town Council, Councillor Harman, who's sat through all the proceedings this evening. You're back on again, sir. So you know the format here. I'm sure I don't need to remind you. When you're ready, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I've got Mr. Steele to talk after me. Is that on the list? Yeah.
I've got Mr. Steele down as an objector.
Yes, that's
he
right.
He will be speaking separately and he will have his own 5 minutes and he's also being joined by another gentleman. So the whole 5 minutes is yours.
Excellent. Thank you. It won't take that long. Unfortunately, this application, we didn't consider it within planning and highways because the timing was such that it didn't make our planning and highways meeting. So we were unable to formally assess this application, hence why you didn't get any formal responses from Newbury Town Council in terms of statutory consultee responses. That was the reason behind that. However, we did have during our meeting a member of the public speak very well and really put forward his objections to it. And we debated that internally within the Planning and Highways Committee. And we just wanted to use this opportunity to put those points forward. Mostly it's really around, we want to reiterate the strong concern from local residents regarding the loss of affordable squash facilities within the parish. The provision of sports opportunities is important, and a change in use from squash courts to a series of studios for soft play area, when much of that already exists in the parish, we think there'd be a real loss to our residents. I acknowledge the officer's point that an internal change may not be, strictly speaking, a planning issue and not material consideration. And that is a shame, but I'll put it more broadly to members that we probably do need to consider the loss of sports provision locally. This sports facility did historically have, I believe, about 4 courts. It's since eroded down to 2, and very soon maybe 0. And that leaves our residents with no affordable squash facilities within the town, which would be a real loss. And we're trying to promote sports, active living, you know, that kind of thing. So it would be a shame to see those lost for what is well provided for in the local community already. But that's perhaps something for members to consider, and maybe more broadly within districts conversations with One Active about how that, if that provision isn't being isn't provided here, then whether there's opportunities elsewhere within the parish for them to provide that. I don't know. But that's pretty much it for me. So I'll leave that to members to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Just stay there 1 minute. We might have a question for you, councillor Vickers, councillor Foote, councillor Arms. No, you're all clear.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, we now move on to objectors. We have Mr. Steele, if you'd like to come up, and we also have a Mr. Tom Westerman, who is going to join us by Zoom. Now, Mr. Westerman unfortunately applied to speak after 4 o'clock yesterday because there was some delay in the invitations going out and he didn't receive it in time. So unable to accommodate him tonight, I'm going to have to suspend standing orders, and then I will ask Mr. Radbourne to invite him in. But before I do that, I need a proposer. I'll propose, and a seconder that we suspend the standing orders. So if I could have a show of hands. It's just when he comes in. Okay. Okay. So we're going to suspend this when he comes in the room. Yeah. And then we'll let him speak. And then after he's spoken, he will be able to answer questions. And then we'll resume back to our standing orders automatically. There's no vote need to be taken. No. Okay. So that is now absolutely clear to me. I hope it is to you. So I did give a proposal, did I not? And a seconder I did. All in favour? Thank you. Therefore, we will suspend the standing orders when Mr. Westerman comes in. And he is with us, is he, Mr. Yes, he is with us. Right. Now, I don't know whether you two gentlemen have met and spoken and how you're going to split your time. You've got 5 minutes for both of you. Have you any idea how long you were speaking for?
Yep. I will speak for approximately 3 minutes and then I'll hand over.
Okay. I will be flexible with regards to the handover on the Zoom because sometimes it's not like he's actually in the room with us. So we'll start the clock when you're ready, sir.
And indeed, if we've still got time after the both of us have spoken, I may well add some more.
Yes, certainly.
In order.
You've got the full 5 minutes between you when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. So my name's Nick Steele, and as was mentioned by Councillor Harman, I attended the Newbury Town Council just recently in order to put forward my objections. So my objection isn't toward the, isn't against the redevelopment of the Northcroft Leisure Centre. I recognise that absolutely it is in need of improvement. My objection is solely around the eradication of the squash facility, and feel that the approach that's been taken, which is sponsored by West Berkshire Council, needs to actually consider some options whereby instead of removing what is going to become an Olympic sport, which is going to see an uptick in participation across the UK in a sport that we have been historically very successful at globally. This just doesn't feel like the right thing to be doing. I have run this the Squash League for approximately 8 years. I ceased doing that 2 or so years ago. I have maintained a presence here. I've done that whilst trying to request support from Northcroft and the franchise owners to enhance the squash playing activity. That hasn't happened. I see that the gym, there are physical education people who support participation in the gym that are employed by the franchise holders. This is not the case for squash. This has never had any kind of sponsorship from Northcroft. So I would actually welcome a more positive collaboration with everyone active to put forward how we can actually better use these facilities. These are facilities that we were initially told the squash courts needed to go because it was core to the redevelopment. But actually, the footprint is exactly the same.
You have 30 seconds left of your 3 minutes.
Okay, and these squash courts are currently being used for other exercise things, which is showing the flexibility of that footprint currently. We do not need an expansion to the soft play area. We need to be preserving the activities for people which will have more longevity than is possible through an enhancement of soft play. And this is not the unique selling point. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Nick, and good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, and we suspend standing orders. Do carry on.
Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Yeah, a few issues I wish to raise with regards to this planning proposal, and that is, following up on what Nick has already said around removing the opportunity for others to play squash in the area. There is ample gym and studios facilities in Newbury, whereas provision of squash is poorly provided. If we look at recent development over the last 10, 15 years, we've lost courts at Greenacres, at David Lloyd's, and people have had to shift from place to place to continue to play squash. And again, we're being turfed out of another local facility. Kennet has been proposed as a alternative, but this isn't viable for a lot of people. It's not easy to access. I myself would have to take some public transport, which would take me 40 minutes to get there from West Newbury. So we don't believe that there are viable alternatives, and it has been shown that the spaces can be utilised more than they are currently, through yoga lessons or kickboxing was in one of the objections. So yeah, we believe that there hasn't been enough effort by everyone active to increase squash usage. It could be done relatively easily and provide them return on investment for the space. I also believe that this does breach the national planning framework for the provision of sporting facilities, again, not showing any viable alternative or any alternative facilities in the local area. I'd also like to raise the point that the previous franchisee refurbished the courts only 4 years ago. So there's obviously value seen, enough to invest in them. So I question why the new franchisee and
Mr. Westerman, start your conclusions, please.
Why everyone active has sought to remove the courts. So yes, thank you for
well done. Your time is up. Thank you very much, both of you, for those presentations. Members, any questions, please? We do. Councillor Abbs, who would you like to address it to, Councillor?
Both gentlemen,
Okay.
They seem to be representing the same. You mentioned about running the league for the last 8 years. You stopped a couple of years ago. How many participants do you have in the league?
We have about a dozen.
About a dozen. Okay.
And that's without any investment from the franchise holder in sustaining that.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Vickers?
Your issue is really about affordable access to squash, is that right? I mean, I can understand that you feel that a local authority should be the one that provides affordable, is that right?
Absolutely, and we've had a strong objection to from Newbury Town Council, which was pleasing to receive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Steele and Mr. Westerman, to be courteous to you, I'm going to ask Mrs. Inston just to explain the ins and outs of planning policy, and she will explain the limitations that this committee have got with regards to our policies. We appreciate your presentation, and I think we're sympathetic to the loss of the squash courts. I won't say any more than that. Mrs. Inston, just explain. I don't normally do this, but I think the fact you've both made a good presentation, just be courteous and just explain where we are.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, members' attention is just drawn to the Section 55 of the Planning Act, which states what development is and what is a consideration for determination in a planning application. And development of land can be a change of use, but not operations that impact the interior of the building unless it's listed, obviously. And replacing the internal squash courts with sports studios would be an internal operation that wouldn't require planning permission. So the application in front of members this evening is purely for the external works to the building, because the squash courts could be converted to exercise studios at any time without planning permission.
Thank you, Mrs. Inston. I hope that helps.
Well, we understand the situation.
Thank you.
The challenge is more that this is a West Berkshire sponsored.
We get the gist. Thank you so much. That's very kind of. Thank you both. And we resume standing orders now. We have no supporters, no agent, but we do have, no, we don't. I thought Councillor Martha Vickers was going to come this evening. I've got apologies.
She's got a prior engagement.
Yeah,
with the town
okay, so we've got no representation from the ward member.
Councillor Amitraj is also attending a parish meeting which has an important agenda item.
Members, quickly, any? Yeah, thank you. I was just going to ask Mrs. Noley whether or not it's time that we should. Yeah. I leave it with you, members. Are we going to be done within the next 10 minutes? Okay, let's very quickly move on. Any questions of Mrs. Inston's presentation? No. I won't go through the main issues of consideration.
Sorry, Chairman, I do actually, because at what point was the squash court information introduced? During,
is that a question? That's
a question. Was it
Question
introduced by Deborah Inston, or was it introduced by the speakers? Because in my head, it was mentioned during the planning application description, but maybe I'm misremembering.
No, the application isn't for the internal changes. So the use.
So you didn't mention it when you.
No, I mentioned it in the presentation purely in relation to the objections that have been raised. So it was just in relation to the objections that have been raised to the application, and just to draw members' attention to the fact that they're not planning considerations.
Okay.
Thank you. I think in consideration that this shouldn't be rushed through, and it's going to give, I'm going to give members the opportunity to debate at their will, not that they're under any pressure to finish at 10 o'clock. I think I will put it to the vote that are we happy to continue after 10 o'clock if the business isn't finished? All in favour? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Therefore, we will continue should we go past 10 o'clock. So I will read out the things that we should be considering on this, which is the character and appearance, the neighbourhood amenity, highways matters, which have been covered with Mr. Goddard, flooding and drainage, ecology, trees and sustainable construction. Who'd like to start the debate, please?
I'll go.
Councillor Abs, then I'll follow.
Yeah, well, you just said we're allowed to discuss amenity.
Let me sit down.
Squash courts are in me. I met my wife on a squash court. So I'm actually quite precious to me, to be frank. So it is an amenity. And I think if nothing else using this platform, I'd like West Berkshire Council to be aware that they should look at this. I mean, everything the objectors presented makes common sense to me, but you're correct. We can't unfortunately consider it, even though it is an amenity that we're losing.
We're just looking at the foyer on the front. Whether they take the coffee, whether they take the coffee machine away or they turn a room into.
I understand, but I
It's
just.
not for us to
I
consider.
wanted to put it on the
unfortunately.
record, shall we say?
Okay, it's recorded. Thank you. Councillor Wollaston.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. I propose to raise it at the next executive or council meeting.
Councillor Foote, I think I saw some interest from you.
Yeah, Chair, it was only just to say that the officers made it very clear that we're here to discuss the planning application before us and the canopy, etc. But I feel it would just be appropriate for me to mention that I have had regular communications with the squash playing community, if I can put it like that. I don't feel comfortable that this is the forum for me to make a statement about that because I don't think it's planning matter. However, if members felt they wanted clarification of where we are, you know, with my portfolio responsibilities, I'd be very happy to give that. But strictly speaking, I feel it's not, unfortunately, a planning matter.
Yeah.
So I'm in your hands, basically. Thank you.
I think that was pointed in your direction, Councillor Wollaston.
I honestly don't think that's a matter for this meeting. It's something for, per se, either executive or
For another time.
a
Yeah.
question.
Any more contribution on the debate? Thank you, Councillor
I
Collins.
actually think it enhances that site. It looks very nice, that new canopy, the colours, the fact that we're actually going to be spraying the other windows the same colour to sort of merge in. It's not going to change the parking. It's not going to change the cycle. Any of those things. I think it's just going to be an enhancement. I'm happy to propose officers' recommendations.
Not for me to ask.
I'm happy to second that.
Okie dokie. Before we do, any consideration of conditions? We're all quite happy. We don't want the paint change. We don't.
I mean, is it appropriate to have some sort of condition about, I mean, a sort of management plan, because we are actually talking about a live facility. I don't know whether that's a planning matter to ensure that the developer, whoever that is, you know, takes account of existing use of the facility. After all, we're not going to close the North Group.
It's West Berks Council, isn't it?
Yeah, but we're also a different legal entity as a planning authority. Is there a planning condition that's appropriate for what is if you like, a working facility at the time an application is going through? See what I mean?
Mrs. Inston.
Thank you, Chair. No, in this instance, I would advise members that it wouldn't be reasonable to put on such a condition because the application is purely for some fairly minor external changes and enhancements. So it wouldn't be reasonable in this instance to put on such a condition.
Covered by health and safety law, basically, is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's covered by
other legislation.
Thank you. I think on the site meeting, we also considered whether or not that large surface of blocks or whatever they are should be permeable. You might have an observation on that. I think you suggested that it wasn't acceptable, but maybe you could say, Mrs. Inston. I'm not proposing that. I'm just wondering that on the site meeting there was a reason as to there was no need for it, just in case anybody was thinking about it.
I think, Chairman, for transparency, what we discussed on the site visit might be worth just making sure that's in the minutes somewhere.
I think we decided at the site meeting, or we were advised that there was no need for it to be permeable. Am I correct?
No, that what's being proposed, the SUDS officer has raised no objections to. However, we could put in planning. I did look at it earlier, actually, and you members could add a condition requiring details of the surfacing. Because at the moment, we've just got the floor plan, which just says black and grey pavers. So we could get further details by a condition, a hard surfacing materials condition.
All happy with that? Thank you. So I'm ready to take this forward. So we're quite clear of that single condition that's going to be raised. Have a proposer, Councillor Gaines, and a seconder, Councillor Vickers. And the recommendation is to delegate the development manager to grant planning permission subject to the conditions stated in the agenda before us and the additional condition identified just a moment ago. I will ask Miss Noley if she would be kind enough to conduct the vote, please.
Can I have members in favour, please? That's unanimous.
Thank you. That application is granted. Members, thank you very much for your contribution tonight. A lot of business, interesting applications, and I close the meeting at 9:55.